to this meeting of the OG Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Beale and I will be chairing this meeting, which is being streamed live on YouTube. Before we start the meeting, I just ask members of the committee and everyone else to make sure that their mobiles are on silent. We will start our meeting with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Nigerian tragedy. Do we have any apologies for absence? Does any member of this committee have an interest to declare?
I'm not sure whether it justifies with interest, but I am governor of two primary schools in the borough, and I'm also governor of Chelsea Westminster Hospital Trust. Since we're dealing with a wide range of subjects,
Yep. And I will declare my day job is in a GP practice in Paddington, where it's conceivable that some of our patients are as far west as the Grenfell area, but most of them won't be.
NHS. I'm sure that would go, but yes. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting.
very great.
So I'm going to ask the committee if we can also the order of business from the published version, and that we consider item 6 relating to the North Kensington Recovery Programme first. Is the meeting amenable to that? And before we move on, and I invite our NHS colleagues to come to the table, I would just remind the room that when we come to questions after we've had an introduction, I will turn first to the committee, then to members of the council who are in the audience, and then to the press visitors. Just keeps it nice and clear whose turn it is. So that's the way I'm doing it. If you'd like to come to the table. The North Kensington Recovery Programme was established by NHS England to address concerns raised by the coroner, and the programme was developed to deliver a commitment with trauma-informed, community-led care, shaped by those it serves and adapted as needs evolve. And can I ask Rob Hurd, who's the Chief Executive of North West London Integrated Care Board, Andrew Stephen, who's the Biomedical Director for NHS North West London, and we've got Cameron Hill, who is the Assistant Director of North Kensington Recovery, and Jennifer Roy, who's the Chief Nursing Officer at NHS North West London, to perhaps introduce their paper. And I know that you're operating under some constraints in terms of information constraints, and if you want to describe those, please do.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I will bring in the team to sort of follow up with some opening remarks and then leave maximum time for questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come for the update. since we were last here, clearly there's been a lot of things going on. We heard that loud and clear the messages that we needed to redesign services to meet need, acknowledge the fact that the NHS had not historically, although we've had significant funding and put into service and commissioned a range of services, and our role to commission those services to meet the needs of the community. And so the phase to reset that and to try and design the model for the future, if we came out of the 5 years into the next 5 years, has been uppermost in what we've been trying to set up. That is within an environment of significant change that we've been subject to, and we are not at the end point even now of what those services potentially are going to be funded for the period ahead, because that is still under discussion. But we felt that rather than wait any longer before giving an update on the next step, it was important to come back here with your invite to give an update of where we've got to give that overall context of the kinds of services we're designing, the importance that we recognise of community trust, the importance that we need to be in this for the long term, and that the NHS will commission services over the longer term, and against that, the needs that we have in this community. I'm going to hand over to Cameron and Andrew to talk through a little bit of where we've got to and what we plan for the future. But this isn't a decision point, this isn't a setting any point in time, this is an update as to where we've got to on designing those future services for the years ahead, and where we've got to on the learning from the years that have gone by around that, and acknowledgement that we need to continue to listen and do better to meet the needs of this community. Thank you, Cameron.
Thank you. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. So just 3 things for me to speak to. So firstly, the focus and a look back around the inception of the programme, work to date, and then taking us back through last year and some of the work that's been done, thinking about the shape of services. And then lastly, with a specific focus on the engagement and involvement that's been facilitated in the programme and for the Forensic Health programme. So, as people will know, the North Kensington Recovery Programme was originally a 5-year programme up until March 24. It was an NHS England commitment for 5 years to fund this work. So 24-25 was a transition year after that 5-year programme ended. And we used some of that time in the programme to really think about what we needed to do in terms of sustainability going forward and continuity. So as people may know, there are some components of the service offer at the moment address physical health, mental health, emotional wellbeing, self-care. So we have the Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service, we have enhanced health checks, we have had a Healthier Futures programme with a range of voluntary community sector partners. So you'll find a little more detail on page 2 of the report, list out the different elements of that service model. And just to mention that very recently, in the last 4 months, we initiated personalised health assessments for people who left the tower after 1:28 in the morning, when the volume of smoke was thicker and may be more hazardous. So on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, those were set up. We have 2 providers, one is an NHS provider, one is a non-NHS provider, so people had a choice of where and how to book. And we've had around half the number of people who potentially book in do so far. So just recognising that we've been in a phase of work, thinking about the future and the health needs of the population. We've had a focus on this being both responsive and sustainable, and making sure that resources align with need both now and into the future. So there are a few things that really fed into our approach, working together with partners, with public health, with NHS providers and with communities as well. So our model of care work over the last 9 months has sort of built on some really important evidence bases. We have the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, which was published again in 2024 as a refresh. So that gives sort of information around the kind of support that is relevant for communities affected by Grenfell. We have lots of data from our services, lots of activity data, and other public health insights to feed in, including the health and wellbeing survey. And we've also had some really important external publications, the second phase inquiry report, the lessons learned report from the King's Fund. All of that has fed into consideration about how we might do things differently and better. So again, there's more detail in the second appendix on health needs, a kind of summary of health needs as we understand them. And that is a set that we played back both to our partners and providers, but also to communities as well, to get a kind of sense check and say, does this reflect your health needs? Do you think that there's anything missing in here? Because we wanted to make that part of the dialogue. So thinking about the model of care working group which ran for a period into this year, we very much used a partnership approach to think about the kinds of services that we would need. And some common themes came through from that. So we'd already heard from the Future Grenfell support consultation how important personalisation and tailored services were to people. So different people need different things and didn't want to run a size-fits-all solution. We also are very aware core services, core NHS services over time in North Kensington will need to be in a place to address the needs of everybody in North Kensington. So we would in future envisage a blend of Grenfell-specific services and core services that are really well placed to meet people's needs as well. And as we heard earlier, there is integrated neighbourhood team development and working that is coming together and working around place and neighbourhoods. That is the delivery vehicle for integrated care in the future, and where we see a lot of this work coming together at a local level and place. So in summary, there's the two appendices around the community engagement that we have done and summarised. They're both published, the Grenfell NHS website, and they're both attached in your packs. Most recently, we've concluded the second phase of work, and there were 9 themes that came out of that, which I'll touch on very briefly. In addition to that, we know that adherence to Regulation 28, thinking about prevention of future deaths and coroner's recommendations, is very important going forward, and that we're in a place where we have a timetable of future stresses, and deconstruction of the tower and some other significant events mean that we need to have a really flexible and adaptive approach, because we can't predict how people will respond, how they will feel about some of those events that are taking place that are really significant to them. So in terms of what we heard most recently through engagement, we heard about proximity to the tower being an indicator of need, and to follow need. People were keen to see physical and mental health integrated in the same place wherever possible, going to the same place to get all of their health needs met. We also heard that there are some levels of anxiety and stress that are really enduring for people, and that they are still being felt and they will change. There continue to be some concerns around toxicity, around how my health is now, how my health may be in the future, that may be linked to the materials in the town, the wider environment. As people really want to know that they will be okay and they are okay. So we'll continue to look into that and any future testing options. And finally, we want a mix of not just clinical services, but peer-led and community-based services as well. And very often it's not the classic NHS services that help to keep people feeling well and healthy. And we've heard that very clearly. Finally, I'll just mention we heard a lot about doing things differently, about doing things in an accountable way, a transparent way. That includes how we make decisions. So under community-led recovery, that's something that we want to develop and be led by the community around for the rest of this year and going forward. So we'll continue to have those conversations and understand what that means to people, and how we can really work differently for communities genuinely led by them.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a short update on some of the clinical work that we've been doing. So I'm fortunate enough to chair several meetings that involves the clinicians that are delivering the screening and delivering the care to suppliers and to the community. And many of them came to the engagement meetings that we had in January around the new model of care. We were able to listen and engage with the population and talk to them about the model of care there. So I thank them for turning up to that. We have had meetings with Professor Stack this year when we had a chat with the professor about the paper that she brought out on toxicity, and we talked to her about future work that she was doing. She was able to share with us some of her concerns, and we were able to listen to those and adjust the model such that any kind of cancer screening that was necessary we made sure that it was available, depending on what was going forward. We've also talked to the Firemen's Union around the work that they've been doing on toxicity and effectiveness, and that's an ongoing conversation we're having with those researchers too. So we're trying very hard to inform the debate with as much information as we can from the people that are doing the studies around us. We reached out to the Twin Towers medical teams that are doing screening and monitoring to them just to make sure that there was learning that they had that we couldn't pick up on and work here. It was difficult because they run a very different health system to us, but it was insightful to see that some of the things that they are picking up that we may need to be aware of. But they were also able to illustrate the differences they thought between what they were doing and what we were likely to see here. Because the likelihood that any change is likely to be in very small numbers, we've also employed some help from Imperial University around how do you pick up changes from very small numbers, from very small levels of statistics too. So we've reached out for some help from that to make sure that we can pick up that. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Again, when you go to add something, may I turn to the committee then?
We have to take questions.
Public ministers, Bob didn't mention you, so I didn't want to leave you out. I'm going to start over there. So can I just ask the committee, we've got lots of people here who are really interested in asking questions. Can we keep our questions succinct and possibly consolidated? But on the other hand, I'm anxious that this has as much debate as it needs.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this very interesting and informative report. Something strikes me in this report when you said you did engagement for developing the model of care, and I would like to know when this was, because I attended two, and I didn't see no form of presentation on the model of care that was going to be delivered. I also stressed about the questionnaire that was not fit for purpose, and it wasn't very well done considering what we went through in Kensington after Grenfell fire. I think it was very poorly written, considering the information that we're trying to get in order to actually shape services moving forward and actually enhance services. So I would like some information and an answer for that. And my other question is, how will the ICB ensure that individuals affected by living around 500 meters are excluded from the need services? So those who are affected and were living at Grenfell and now they've moved away, how is the ICB going to ensure that they're covered for, emotional support moving forward? And given the community mixed preferences, how will the ICB coordinate between clinical and non-clinical for mental health support services?
Thank you. We'd like to address those two questions.
And you want to pick up things, particularly 2030. We start with the people who've moved away from the area, and move on to the other bits. So in response to that question, there is a principle of flexibility where people are affected, but they live in the area. So, for example, with some of the CWL services, there is an effort to make contact with people, although they may no longer be living at their old addresses. We understand that not everybody continues to live where they used to live, and we know that we need to be flexible as a system and responsive to people who moved out of area. We do know that through working with service providers, we get feedback that sometimes it's not possible to get hold of people who may be on a list, and the phone number may no longer be in use, or their whereabouts are unknown. But that is sort of a proactive approach to making contact that is definitely encouraged. In terms of any kind of eligibility criteria, I think again, the principle of flexibility is really important in recognising need. So If somebody's been affected, then services will work with that individual around their needs.
Andrew, I don't know if you want to comment on the primary care aspect, people moving away.
Yeah, so I think there is a register, and patients are identified as Grenfell survivors, and there are IT systems that flag them up. So they should have access to the services as we go forward, and I hope that's the case. The question around the mixture of care for mental health patients, whether it's medical or non-medical, is a principle that I think will continue, and certainly CNWL has a history of doing that. And so I anticipate that as their services develop and mature going forward, that they will include a range of clinical and non-clinical services. The other arm of delivering both mental and physical services to the residents in North Kensington will hopefully be more and more through the neighbourhood INT, which is a group of clinicians, voluntary sector and local authority, people coming together to first of all assess need, design services and then deliver the services. So we've got a good history of doing that, and certainly it's a priority in North Kensington to continue that. And we're talking to the local authority about starting something called, is it North Kensington First, which is a way of prioritising resources and schemes to look after that community particularly.
Yeah, in the report, it said 1,000 clients, but I think now, also the engaged ones are engaged and the ones that are not engaging. So have we got any data of relapsing as in coming back into service? Do we have any data on that? To those who weren't engaging? Do we have any data of service? Because as you know, people who are traumatized, sometimes they're not ready to engage. So at that first point of all, now, do we have any data to see if there's anyone that come back into service and need the support now?
So firstly, on the 1,000 figure that's in the report, so I had picked up that is an error. So that should read 2,000 in terms of completed treatment episodes.
Okay, so it's 2, yeah?
So it's 2,000, yes. So that is an error. We do receive service activity data from CNWL and systems through a monthly report. So that comes to us, so it's validated through the return directly from them. There is a focus on completed episodes of care. So, for example, a health check be considered a completed episode of care. A long-term monitoring intervention would also be a completed episode. We know that people may be in a therapy modality for a while, over several sessions, but when that treatment is completed, they may come back at a future date, but that would be counted in the same way. So we have some different, I suppose we have referrals, we have activity that's counted in different ways for children and young people and for adults as well. So we've really summarised that at a very high level in the report.
But people are open to coming to the service at any stage. So if they thought previously that we weren't ready for it, then the service remains open to them.
Thank you. I'll move on to Toby.
I was looking at the question.
Sorry, oh yeah. Sorry.
So I think it's about how the sessions inform the development of the service model.
Yeah.
And the concerns about the questionnaire.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very concerned about that question, and I'll tell you why. When you read that questionnaire, it seems as if it's gearing towards a particular service instead of opening it up to collect data to make the right decision based on the evidence that is put in front of you. So for me, I just don't think that. And also, when you go online to get that questionnaire, you don't have, when it says, what therapy do you prefer? Or who supports you the best? You only have one option, but when it's printed, you can tick as many boxes. So that is not factual data.
Yeah, I was going to say, I recall that evening when it was mentioned, and I think what we got to do is to learn from that. So I think if we're thinking of any questionnaires for the future, we really need to get yourself and others to be able to say, I'm going to fill this out. What's the information that I need to be able to help us in terms of developing service further? So I apologise for that because I know it was quite upsetting that night.
Yes.
About the questionnaire. So if we are thinking of doing something for the future, we've got to learn from that and then come back to yourself and our residents and say, we're going to put something together. Can you help us to make sure we maximise the information that we need to develop services? So thank you.
Thank you. Lesson learned.
Yeah, it is absolutely.
Thank you. My two colleagues outside of me are stronger on some of the finer details. So I do want to ask slightly broader questions. But number one is about the structure of the steering groups and how information is processed, how eligibility membership of them, and how their results are sort of scrutinised in particular. And I'll ask the second question, which is slightly broader, and it's just because it does hit me that fewer people tend to tick the other box, right? So if you've got 25% of people ticking other as in what they're spending on, and what you're looking at is groceries like food, household items, right? And it's, yes, there's also, like I said, broader, so as overarching case. If we're looking at how are we thinking about the fact that the immediate Grenfell area, Nottingdale, in terms of poverty, in terms of deprivation, in terms of multi-deprivation, has plummeted, right, since 2017, as far as I'm aware. So it seems that on some of these actual results, some of these figures point towards that. That intrinsically sort of to me just raises, like I say, broader questions of like, but I do think it's important that in these, specific briefs, somebody's thinking about how this ties into the broader question. Why is it like this? How can we reverse this direction of travel? And does that actually mean you start to have to look beyond the brief you had in Grenfell? And I know it's a broad question, and I'm trying to be succinct with it, but I hope that makes sense to you and you can give me some kind of response.
Yeah, Cameron Jones comes back to the membership of the steering group bit of that, but I've just the idea, and I think Andrew has alluded to some of this. Ultimately, we've got to acknowledge there is need in our communities, and that the need that and the services that we need to provide to respond to that need are the product of a multiplicity of things, and the state of the health and care system in responding to that need. It needs to be designed based on both the quantitative and qualitative feedback, the experience data, and we have a whole approach to that in addition to the particularly targeted specific needs of the Grenfell community, in order to take both quantitative and qualitative data to inform our joint strategic needs assessment for our community. So the inequalities, deprivation, the racial inequalities that we have in health and care services, both in terms of identification of need, the response to and ability to provide access to that, and the well-evidenced reason for our existence as a commissioner of health and care services, to address the inequalities and the improvement in health outcomes. So our whole REGAR strategy, our whole joint report plan is geared around addressing that variation that is inherent within healthcare services, irrespective of the very, very important issues we're talking about tonight, which we have a specific additional approach to with our Grenfell recovery, our North Kensington recovery programme, with the North Kensington First neighbourhood teams, which are designed to ensure that our community providers, our mental health providers, our primary care, our GPs, and our voluntary services sectors are organising around those individual community needs. So our overall role is to ensure that the funding that we have, the resources that we have, are targeted at that need and that is laid out in the joint strategic needs assessment. And then that is enhanced by the particular needs of the Grenfell community that we've set up as a long-term recovery programme with additional resources, and start to work with our providers that we commission those services from. But to distinguish the need of that we're talking about specifically tonight from the needs caused by the variation that have occurred, either separately to that or occurring anyway, is all part of the challenge that we are here to, in the NHS, to commission those services against that. I don't know if Jen can talk about specific steering group and membership, because we need that community, voluntary services, providers, as well as ourselves as the buyers of those services, to work with our local authority colleagues.
So we're taking the opportunity at the moment to actually do a look back about the purpose of our steering groups and about how we can transition it for the future. And I think the key thing is it's great that you can have your partnership and the neighbourhood teams, and all the different bodies sitting together. But actually, what is it we're trying to achieve? But actually, what is the message back into the community, to the use of services? And I think there's a gap there. That how do we actually bring our residents and use services into those conversations? So I think it's something that we need to think about. That we have more of our residents probably coming to these meetings and having the say around the table, because we want to do a collective God. So we are taking that opportunity to do a review of all our steering groups that we have, because we have a number of meetings that we just need to.
Right, can I just follow up on this as well? I'm also wondering about, I mean, and it is mentioned in the documents here, but about how we're increasing visibility to and accessibility. I think it's been mentioned several times, mental health services particularly. I mean, I know people who live a couple of woods over, and they hear a helicopter and it's all coming back. And I just know that I think there's generally awareness that we haven't quite nailed how to get to all the people we need to.
Yeah.
So
Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah.
Yes, so this ultimately is the challenge we face. So we have attempted to commission services and put in place that are responsive to local needs. We are acknowledging the fact that we are still on the journey to ensure that we're getting those services to the people that need it, and need to access those services. And to sit here and say, it's all right, the services are there, they're just not being used, it's not good enough for anybody. And that's why we need to reinforce the need for the engagement, understanding as to why those services that we are commissioning and putting in place are not being fully utilised by those that need those services that we put there forward. Notwithstanding the fact that that's a significant use of precious doctors, nurses, allied health professionals, non-clinical staff who are geared around those needs, not spending time with the communities that we're paying for. And therefore we need to understand the reason for that, and keep working on the reason for that as it's being improved, and opening up on that engagement and working in a local setting with the local authority team, with the providers there, and joining that up so that it is more focused around community rather than just putting in those services that are not fully utilised in that sense. But overall, our aim is to put the money into the services to meet the need, and those and that's part of that. We acknowledge there are gaps across the health services of our core services, so we have to do a balance between what the standard core expectation of any citizen should be of core NHS community primary care and health services, and then we need to understand the local variation we have in need around that, and put in place, as we have in North Kensington, additional resources to meet that need. But both of those things need to be true. If we design the core NHS offering in too much of a variable way, we won't get the maximum resources to actually put towards the needs of the specific needs.
Can I just go back and say, so it goes back to about the questionnaire, about making sure the question is done properly, so that we can get the questions, get the answers, and then how do we use our community to help to reach the hard to reach individuals, because we have that everywhere, so that we can actually make sure that as we transition into a new way of working, we can reach out to everybody across the,
Sorry, Chair, sorry. So you need to ensure just 3 words: the visibility, accessibility, and culturally sensitive.
Yeah. Thank you, Portia. Well summarised. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. This is really very, very important. It's underlying this is the coroner's concerns and their 8 recommendations, purposely to prevent future deaths. And I know that there were future deaths. So hopefully going forwards, we can actually implement these in a way that will be effective in that way. One of the things I wanted to ask was in terms of proximity, being an indicator of vulnerability, shall we say, or effectiveness. I'm sure, and I'm just wondering if I'm correct in assuming, would you say that the vulnerability to trauma is not only determined by proximity, but also things like pre-existing experiences and mental health issues?
Yes,
Yes,
I think we've acknowledged that every individual is different, and all of that is relevant to the equation.
Yeah, so the answer is, although we've got guidelines around certain services and proximity, which is the right point, Councillor. What we do say to everyone involved in the service is, if you think this person needs the service, whatever it happens to be, then let them access the service. Yeah. So there's no cut off.
No, good, because there might be people who, for instance, were previously known to services, who were therefore at greater risk, and who unfortunately were not acknowledged as such, and perhaps not given the care they might have had. So I hope that is something that can be looked at going forwards. In terms of transparency around population monitoring, you've mentioned about the toxicity concerns, and I was wondering if you would commit to working with our public health here in the council, making sure that there is transparency around the monitoring in terms of presentations, symptoms and deaths before or after the fire, because I think that would go a long way to alleviating people's anxieties about that. And I know that that's something that's been difficult to coordinate so far. I see you nodding, which is
yeah. So Anna comes along she's very closely involved with the groups that I chair. So she comes and informs as well as listens, and so and we did some joint work with her on the JSNA as well. So I anticipate that work will continue.
I think it's about, again, as Councillor Thatcher said, visibility. And I just also wanted to add, I also attended the engagement meeting that was in January. Engaging with this generally as a member of the community affected is painful inherently. But I just wanted to say I also did not see any future models. So I'm certainly curious how this is evolving and how this will be presented to residents for feedback going forwards.
In other words, I suppose, was it an iterative process? You got feedback, then presented something, and then went off and changed it again, or was it something?
I didn't see it either.
So
it was more
gathering
feedback under different topics, wasn't it?
You could enlarge on that.
So we, in terms of the engagement at the beginning of the year, in January and February, we thought about topics in terms of the different health areas and the different concerns that we heard from people around monitoring their own health, health assurance, mental health and emotional well-being. All those larger events, we used some roundtable discussions to really try and unpick some of the themes and what people wanted to say about what mattered to them. So we took all of that and put it together with the survey data, but also with some data from focus groups, really to just start to get a much richer picture and an understanding about what mattered to people around their own health needs, because service data and quantitative data really only tells us so much. But it is a layered approach, so it's not done in January and February. We need to continue doing that, checking in with people. And certainly once we're in a position to come back and to do some further engagement, and we are very mindful of the anniversary month of June and really doing that in a way that's sensitive, and particularly when people may have a lot going on, we want to time that so that it works for people, and that also those opportunities are close to home. They're in community venues. We're able to take that opportunity out to people, and we can use different channels if we need to, so that we get the feedback. So the engagement will be ongoing throughout the next phase.
Thank you very much. It's got one more. One more. Sorry, no. I just wanted to ask whether what your view is on the importance of locally available provision for residents, given that 75% of Nottingdale residents do not have access to a car. and we have already seen, regrettably, some removal of services from the area, which places an additional barrier to access.
Have you got some examples?
Yes, I have. You want me to say them?
Yeah.
Parkside,
Yeah.
CAMS, adult psychotherapy, and palliative care would be another one.
Thank you.
The balance needs to be struck between what, as I was describing before, about what the core offering and the ability of us to staff and resource services for our communities and response to local need. We can't have all services in every location at all times. We try and have a core offering and enhance that. I can't comment on the particular list that's been described.
Can we be mindful of not removing any more services from North Kensington?
But this, with
As a general overall point, bearing in mind that we have a priority to care for the physical and mental health of the Grenfell community,
so
in proximity to the tower, who don't have access to
it
cars.
wouldn't be appropriate for me to never say never on any service change going forward in a world in which we need to continue to engage on that.
Could you take on board the points?
I will take on board the point that we have to balance the overall plan and indeed in terms of investment in resources, significant additional investment over many years out of hospital into that community. And if we compared over time, investment in our mental health services, investment in primary care, relative to other areas of our. So I think that the services that we are funding in that area have grown.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you. I've just got two questions. The first one was just with events, like the towers, events removal on the horizon. Are there plans to provide additional trauma support to those affected? I appreciate that you have agreed to keep the MCAS on St Charles. But in addition to this, can you sort of understand what that support looks like?
My understanding was we were looking at putting specific things in place on this.
So we have a commitment to review health needs on an ongoing basis to sort of understand what might change for people, particularly around really significant milestones, like taking down the tower, working with our colleagues and our partners who are providing some of those specialist services at the moment will be for the rest of this year on an ongoing basis. So the current set of services that we have in place at the moment will sort of gear and remobilise around events in a way that is sensitive to what might be coming up for people. So that extends to GP care as well. We will work very closely with GPs to make them aware of potential increase in demand, referrals, and of the kind of activity that they may be seeing. We have quite a lot in place to support more understanding trauma-informed working, for example, of culturally competent working, and sort of really making sure services are responsive and effective around communities' times of needs.
Yeah, and we do anticipate, Councillor, we do anticipate that there probably will be an increase in need as with the services and for a period of time after that. So we have identified money that should be available for extra services if it's if and when it's required. So that piece of work has been done.
And you're not concerned about resources or capacity in terms of that additional plan?
We've no, I think we've got financially resources available to pay for extra services if they're required, whether that's from GPs or from other services.
And then just a more general kind of, given the well-documented and ongoing mental health needs and the lack of trust that does exist within the community and with NHS services, what specific measurable steps are being taken to deliver trauma-informed, culturally competent care, and how will this progress be tracked and fed back to the community to try and rebuild some of that trust?
So I think having an ongoing team, longer term local development of that neighbourhood team approach that we've described, to continue to engage and learn when we make mistakes, what we need to do differently, like the questionnaire, continuous improvement, methodology, trying to create some stability in the local teams, so through developing a coordinated approach across the local providers. I talked about long-term commitment and certainly our long-term commitment to meeting the needs of that community in the North Kensington team is there, and that it will only build over time if we continue to with that kind of approach, and to have investment in that team to continue.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks very much, Chair. In the interest of time, I'll just go for my big question and leave the small ones. And I was very encouraged, Rob, by your opening and saying you were in this for the long term. But the reality is that, like us, you're governed by budget cycles. You presented us with I think it's a 5-year plan in here. And I think last time I saw this when I was on the social care committee about 6 years ago, there was a previous iteration of that we looked at. And let's say you've got these cycles, but yet this is going to be a very long-term endeavour. The Aberfan disaster in Wales was in 1966, nearly 60 years ago. There are still tremors of that in that community, all that later. So what assurance can you give me against the background that you've got these budget cycles? Can you give us that you can embed a culture of keeping this level of service in the community beyond your own terms of office, beyond our terms of office? How can this be embedded within North West London?
So, as you say, we have both a sort of 1-year cycle and a 5-year cycle around this, and so we've made the commitment in the 5-year cycle going forward around this. There is the annual budgetary rounds that we face in terms of the reality of what we've got to do. However, the needs are and why I emphasise the long-term commitment through the joint needs assessment process, the team being in place to take what I described as ultimately the development of our standard NHS core offering for all of our communities versus the way in which we identify the need over and above that and the specific needs we have in the Grenfell community. That is part of our statutory duty to work, so you've got the statute of our responsibility to engage against need and design services. The way in which that works in terms of our work with the health and wellbeing boards on our long-term strategies, and to make sure that this never falls off the list. I would suggest that the sort of technically, statutorily, the commitment to meet need from the healthcare budget that we have to meet health needs, to vary that for the needs of individual communities is the protection there. I totally acknowledge that there's a kind of the reality of that on an annual basis, and indeed as we're reflecting 5-year forward views, I would suggest councillors and MPs need to be vigilant upon the NHS to make sure that is upheld, because nobody can sit here and commit to beyond 5 years, and it's difficult sometimes to commit to tomorrow in the environment in which we face. But that's the kind of a mechanism, as I say, that the development long term of these neighbourhood teams that are embedded into our providers, our GPs, our community services, our mental health services locally, organising themselves as we are asking them to do, and funding and incentivising them with money to do so, to have a North Kensington first integrated neighbourhood team, to use the jargon, organised around the needs of the community, and to only get paid if they are meeting those needs. And that's the kind of direction of travel that we face. We will have less resources, as you know, to level in order to do that, but we will have all the resources that we can targeted at those frontline engagement, involvement of local communities into the design of the services that the commissioner will buy.
So we'll still have a small dedicated team then by Cameron to do the work. So although we're going to try and integrate it into our neighbourhood and partnership, we will still have a dedicated team specifically for Kensington recovery.
Thank you.
So what more commences something you said in the middle there, Rob, which feeds into my supplementary question. What more can we do as representatives of the residents in the community to keep this uppermost in your mind? What are you looking for from us to make sure that we go on track?
So clearly we are after fair shares allocations against population need for people of North West London and indeed Grenfell. We have thus far continued to ensure that we get additional resources targeted at this need. Our overall equation, we are overall, without that resource, we are at a distance from target, so we're short of that overall. And we're continuing to ensure that over the years ahead, that we have those resources. That's point number one of highlighting the resource need of the additional needs. Point number two are the support for the direction that I've described around our providers organising themselves and holding our providers to account on delivery, because I'm a commissioner with the commissioners here and we use the work of the local teams and the clinical experts, but we try and then allocate public resources to meet that need and hold our providers to meeting that need. And one of the things that we've had along the way here is that tension between what we're putting money into something, we're trying to resource up to meet need, but we are not self-evidently seem to be meeting the needs of that community. So we need to continue to promote our providers organising themselves around that, rather than the fragmented landscape that it can often feel like to users of health services, that we're not joined up, we don't talk to each other, and don't trust that this is all joined up. So we're trying to join it up. We're trying to target the funds at that more community-facing service, and the neighbourhood team approach is what we value your support on. Then we can bring the resources and the response to need together.
Thank you. John. Thank you. I think you've just touched on, firstly, my first question was asked down there, but I also wanted to ask about the disconnect in your ratings and the level of trust that actually there is. You read as if you're delivering quite well, and then you have a disconnect in that people are not trusting you. I'd like to you to explain a bit more why. I appreciate you've really covered the issue about what you're doing to address it. And then my second question is, it comes to the challenges of accessing GPs in the area. And I'd be interested to understand how you're looking to help that.
Would you like to answer that one?
In terms of the challenge that the gap, maybe should comment, Cameron. I think that the NHS has not always historically done well at genuine engagement and development and continuous improvement of services and learning as we go. We've tried to correct that. We've continued to try and correct that. But we are often governed by sets of criteria and rules that stand in the way of that, and we're trying to change the way in which we organise ourselves, and evident by what I've already been saying about the investment in neighbourhood teams and organising providers, not for the in the image of the provision of itself, but in the image of its community. And so I think not doing that engagement and involvement well and in partnership sufficiently with members of the community and with other partners, and we've tried to invest in that, we've tried to learn, and we've tried to brush ourselves down. We will continue. The only answer here is to continue to do that and listen and try and do better going forward. That's not to say we haven't attempted, therefore, to the other part of it, how we're describing it, to set those services up, to ask our hospitals, to ask our GPs to do these things, to provide resources and funding in order to say that these things are in place. And we're then into the very difficult equation. It doesn't matter if we put it in place. It's not being utilised and accessed, and the trust isn't there. We have an ongoing journey to recover, to continue to try and recover that.
Thank you.
So I think the other thing is, I think when people use the services, generally speaking, people are happy with them, which is why we're able to report fairly high levels of patient satisfaction with the services or with the GP. But the mistrust that comes, people who probably aren't using the services and therefore staying away, which is the issue that Rob's suggesting we need to address. Around access, we recognise post-COVID and even pre-COVID access remains a problem or an issue of concern. So in West London, previously as a CCG and now as a borough in the ICB, we've invested in incentivising access to GPs. And so that's a scheme that we've been investing in locally and continue to do so. And on top of that, we've joined with North West London on an access piece around general practice, which started this April, which is make access to GPs much easier and to streamline that and to make patients' experience around that much better. We're doing that at scale as well as inside primary into GP practices.
What does that actually mean?
Well, we got so locally we run clinics every weekend. We run clinics every bank holiday. There are clinics running in the evening that support practices, as well as getting practices to have a minimum number of appointments per 1,000 patients, increasing that number during the winter, making sure they've got a range of options around delivery of outbound appointments, whether that's face-to-face, telephone, online, or other. So does that answer the question?
Thank you. I'll come back to you. I'm going to finish going around. Will.
The first point I wanted to make is, could we have more time and shorter paper? Because I put a lot of my personal time in, and I just still don't feel I've done justice in terms of scrutinising this paper. I just don't think that it's possible to scrutinise this amount of information. There is a lot of background information here, and one of the ways around this is, could we have, through scrutiny, more briefing on how the NHS works, well or not so well, with our parallel borough services as well? Because part of the difficulty that I personally feel, and I know my colleagues share this, is that there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of understanding about how different changing parts of the NHS, which are not specifically to do with Grenfell, that we're here to talk about tonight. And if we had prior knowledge of that, we could focus the limited time that we had on this shorter paper, which is really focused on the Grenfell aspects of it. So that's a request.
Perhaps we take that outside. I'll take that outside the
we
meeting, and perhaps in conference with Lucy.
Yeah. First question I want to ask is, will the required budget reductions in the ICB last financial year and this financial year, which are radical, it's 50% reduction this year and 30% last year, will that reduction in resources actually compromise the ability to implement the programs that have been put forward here?
As we sit here now, no. We have effectively what you're talking about is the sort of non-frontline administrative overheads that we incur within, as you described eloquently, the integrated care cuts, board cuts. The whole idea of those is to allow maximum resources for the providers and the community. The whole idea is that we develop neighbourhood teams that have people that are engaging more to translate, as you described, the noise of everything that's going on to what that means for a local community. We do have, and we've got, we're still in deliberation around exactly what scale of resources we have for different component parts. So we are in a process. So you describe an announcement of 50% cuts. That is a whole year ahead of exactly what that means, and a need to sit down and talk to people about what the implications of those are going to be. But the headline spirit of them is to allow for upping the pace on removing the bureaucracy and increasing the neighbourhood team focus around that. So you've got less people like me in layers in the chain, and have that focus around that local community. But we've got a whole year ahead of going through that bit. But for the purpose of today's discussion, that has not been relevant. That 50% has not been relevant to any decisions around what the Grenfell local support team is.
Thank you. It's good to have that assurance, and we'll obviously revisit that when the enactment happens. The second question I want to ask is, it follows on from page 8 and 9, GSNA, but also moving on to page 36. The aspects of GSNA points to mental health, and most issues are not specifically Grenfell related. It's a surprising phrase that I saw there, which is possibly being covered by some of the earlier discussion, and it's a combination of prior needs and sort of exacerbated or complicated by the stress put on it by the Grenfell disaster, on the individual by the Grenfell disaster. And it also points to the fact that the mental health is the most persistent issue in this, or perhaps the physical. The question is to do with how these, through the joined up, personalised physical and mental health care plans, how they will address this, in particular digital. And the supplement to that is, specifically on page 36, it looks at the aspect of the needs of schools, NHS and parents working better together. And I presume that would be disaggregated down into 0 to 5, 5 to 11, 11 to 18 in age groups, which are natural transition points in a child's development, and how this will also help them in implementation of transition to adult care.
Okay, well, there's a lot in that. So,
As there is in your report.
indeed. So, I mean, the first thing in terms of some of the language, I apologise if it's not quite totally correctly in terms of that, but the basic acknowledgement of the joint up to physical and mental health, the fact that you know, again, I won't be able to go into all the detail of our whole mental health strategy about the need that we are investing significant extra funds year on year in mental health support services and other mental health investment strategy. And in full acknowledgement that the distinction between physical and mental health is you know, we are talking about individuals, and it's a whole package that we need to, and so those joint health plans say we are trying to integrate data digitally, so we have one health record. We're looking at it all in one. We're looking at an individual, all of the information about that individual, with the relevant clinicians able to advise on the relevant service and access to services. And yes, working with schools, then if you then link it in with you know, the wider aspects of that, and yes, that would be, you know, there are different issues across those age groups. I think they're not to say more general.
So, when you've got the impact of children, survivors and grief, and that community that we're working through in North Kensington, and then you've got the wider population and the work we're doing around neighbourhood cares, wraparound service. So we know that for mental health children, there's a lot more children accessing the CAM service and mental health services. And the whole idea is to make sure that we help those services for children in the life, and then the north, you know, from 5 to 19, and then that transition from going from 17 to 18 to adult. So that transition piece of work that we're doing. So I think when we look about the way we do the work in the future, it's about what can we offer the neighbourhood, what care can we offer, particularly we're talking about the Grenfell residents, but actually we want to do the work around the wider population. So children are our next generation, and we know children are impacted now, and that's the reason why we've got the CYP service with the mental health support, the CAMS, and we want to make sure that we focus on those children who are transitioning, because I think some of the feedback we've had in the past is about how children are managing at school, and the impact about those who are not able to get into the educational system because of the mental health issues. So we have got a big focus around that, and we've got our dedicated doctors who are focusing around children in the next generation.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Got a few questions, but my overall starting point is I'm a bit concerned, having read this report, about some of the answers you mentioned, so I'll go into them in a little bit of detail. My reading of the report, if you look on page 65, 66, the first paragraph, I'm just trying to understand document. So in the first line, it says that the ICB manages £5.1 billion. If I thought that's correct. And then on page 8, this is a £50 million Grenfell support programme that went up to 52.6 million. My question is the 52.6 included in the 5.1 billion, or is it a separate amount over and above the standard NHS provision?
So we have historically received an additional top up to the standard allocation, which will be included in the 5.1 billion, probably in that number. I don't know this precisely, but in terms of our overall approach, as I said, because we would then have a overall needs-based, because of the way that I'm sorry for the technicalities, a needs-based formula of how much appropriate funding a health system gets for its population. And we have traditionally been below that historically in North West London as a whole. And we have, and there's a recognition of the top up needed for the Grenfell need, and that 50 million relates to the top up we have been receiving. We are expecting over time, therefore, that need to be recognised in our ongoing, forevermore formula of needs in the 5.1 billion as it grows every year, and our distance from target is topped up appropriately so that it becomes business as usual rather than an additional top up. And our commitment is to continue to assess the need and to fund the services needed for that community, irrespective of that top up, because the formula will correct that top up over time, and we will ensure there are ring-fence commitments made against need for that community. That doesn't mean we're committing to a particular sum on any particular day, on any particular year. It does mean we're committing to a process to meet that need and ensure that, as per our statutory duty, that the needs-based assessment for all of our communities, including the very specific needs of this community, are built into what we spend that 5.1 billion. It'll grow at an even faster rate if we have a correction against our needs-based funding formula, which we are continuing to make progress on over time. And therefore, we're spending more proportionally than many parts of the country on growth and investment into some of these services.
That's nice. So maybe going forward, as Councillor Pascal said, is that when we talk about Grenfell and North Kensington, we just focus on that area. So we don't actually talk about the whole ICE and how much money we spend in the RCV. Focus will be, because you've got two sums there. You've got the 6 or 5 billion that we've got as a budget, and then we've got the budget that we have specifically for the North Kensington programme. So I think it's probably just the way we presented it may cause some confusion. So we just have to do it the other way around.
So my concern and the reason for the question, of course, is that you've got a specific cohort we've heard about at the fan, 60-year, 70-year legacy.
Yeah.
In normal budgets, if you absorb a specific amount of money for a specific cohort into the general budget, it gets disappeared, and then the people will be left behind. So I'm extremely concerned that you just absorb it and say, "Oh no, it's gone," and I deal with it in the normal area. So that's what comes across in your response, and I'm extremely concerned.
Can I just, but everything I've been saying is trying to, because I can clearly understand that whatever somebody like me sits here now, it's, what's going to be there in 5, 10 years. What I'm saying is, therefore, if we support the development of neighbourhood teams, the needs-based approach, the statutory responsibilities we have to meet that need, then we won't be at a whim of any particular budgetary cycle and wherever we are each year. We will be driving it from the evidence and the needs of that community based on what that is, because I think you're right. I think there's an absolute danger that it gets lost in that. But if we hold on to the neighbourhood team and identify that need and have a methodology through our health and wellbeing boards and joint strategic needs assessment to make sure that that doesn't happen, then the commissioner who has that 5 billion will be responsible, a duty to demonstrate that is happening, rather than it is reliant on the whim of any particular year and the budgetary cycle. And I do think that's the only answer anybody will be able to give you this, because looking to longer term, none of us can do that.
And then if we turn to page 23, I think we've heard a little bit about this as well. In the middle of the page, we've got low trust of NHS services, and it seems to be yes across the board. And if we turn to page 103, looking at mental health on the right-hand side, second paragraph, we've got in bold print, do not yet have confidence in the services that we offer. And this is talking about mental health, I'll come back to. And then slightly more alarming on page 25, bullet point 3, it says, particularly, the first line of bullet point 3, particularly low for children who live out of area. So my concern there is, Brentford didn't happen yesterday, it happened a long time ago. And yet I'm reading that trust and confidence and about that, but I'm extremely concerned that you've got particularly low for children who live out of area. I can't just contact the parents. Because if the children live out of area, it shouldn't be too difficult to contact the parents because you know where they live. I'm concerned by it.
I comment specifically. So on the point of children and families living out of areas. So we have a paediatric long-term monitoring service, which is responsible for giving children a full health check. So as children grow up, as they sort of move through their developmental stages, that paediatric service is there for them. It's a specific service with a lot of dedicated time for every child. However, not every family chooses to use the service, and a lot of the work that we've done with our colleagues at Imperial has been around how can we do more to encourage families and children to come forward to where they live. So there is some very specific work around trying to increase uptake for that service.
it may be the way Swiss then with practice low is the fact that the access is there, we can reach them out, the access is cheap, probably lower than what we want, so we can probably just need to do that again.
I think I acknowledged up front that we acknowledge all of this is saying there is not the trust. We need to continue to do better at how we generate that. And we need to have a way in which it's not just about we're spending money on services and setting them up, but they're actually being responsive to the needs of the community. And I acknowledge that, you know, some of the causal factors of that historically is we have not generated engagement and involvement in those services, and we haven't generated people accessing the services that we've set up. And I'm acknowledging that that is an issue that we need to continue to work on.
My final question, Chair, is in relation to on page 103, paragraph 1, the £80 million specifically for improving mental health. We've heard a bit about mental health already. Do you have a dedicated helpline for Grenfell survivors to call that's ring-fenced, so it's the Grenfell support line? Do you have GPs that only deal with Grenfell and Grenfell people, so it's ring-fenced so that everybody knows where to go? Because if you try and blend it into the general NHS and it gets lost in translation, no one knows who they're going to or where they're not going to, people won't come. And we've heard a lot, and I'm just extremely concerned that you've been doing this for a very long time, yet you're still having extremely poor take-up, extremely low, not uptake, but just people from the community. And I will counter that, because if you do look on page 28 and look at bullet point 5, you say here that you've got these additional services: swimming, yoga, I think it's massage that you message, frequently mentioning positive feedback. So you are getting positive feedback on some of the services, it says so there. So you are doing some things right, but I'm just very concerned that overall that doesn't seem to be the message that as the councillor said, 300-page document. And I'm very concerned about that, because this is many years ago. So I was asking those specific questions about mental health line and the dedicated service.
Talk about dedicated service so we commission.
Yeah, so council, we do have a dedicated service in a system that is there for survivors and bereaved, and that is a service for them for coordination of their care. And their help needs, joining up with other services that are Grenfell specific and non-Grenfell specific. That in terms of primary care, there are enhanced health checks, which are specifically for survivors bereaved and people who have been Grenfell affected in some way. And so GPs in North Kensington and other GPs in West London are using that scheme and are proactively identifying patients to come in and make use of it, and really promote the benefits of an annual health check to sort of understand where people are with their own health and the concerns that they may have around their health as well.
Thank you. Tracy.
We didn't finish the question. And is there a dedicated mental health line? Question I asked. Just like Samaritans, there's a dedicated Samaritan, there's a dedicated Grenfell.
No, we used to have a phone service a few years ago, but it was very
for just the Grenfell?
Yeah, but it was very rarely used.
So you stopped it.
So was that the SPA, single point of access?
I think that was the replacement to the night service, wasn't it?
Yeah, oh, the night service. Okay.
You can cancel it.
The single point of access.
And then they cancel.
Thank you. So don't let's degenerate into an overall conversation. Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. Most of my questions have already been answered: trust, accessibility, etc. One of the overall observations that I made is that there is no mention of, are all these different bodies going to be, so is there going to be a cohesiveness between different bodies? So, because quite often within NHS it's very popular, I can go for a blood test in one, but we don't have it on the computer, and it's just wasting funds. And I don't see that anywhere here, that sort of cohesiveness between different bodies who are doing, consultation, all the different services that you provide. And do you plan to do that?
So that's the whole reason behind where we've been describing the move to neighbourhood teams, where we're organising our providers to be more focused around communities that are facing services, as opposed and joining up the data and the record between those different providers, so that the community, or the mental health provider, the primary care clinicians, doctors, nurses, allied health professionals are all working together around that. That's the terminology, but apologies for the jargon, the neighbourhood health approach, and setting up those teams in those existing providers, Central North West London, the GPs, the community mental health services, to do that through a neighbourhood team supported by Karen and the team in terms of the community engagement.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Show me one more thing. And the other thing I was ask, this is more of a clarification. On page 9, when you talk about the evidence gathering and analysis, one of the things that it just puzzled me, it says ongoing concerns about service navigation was trust and cultural appropriateness. What is that? Cultural appropriate. I mean, how does that impact?
So we learned lots of lessons very quickly about how different sectors of community view things like mental health, mental illness, and other things. And so we, Krishna set up a nationally approved cultural competency training course so that we could understand different groups.
Sorry, Krishna who? Are you really putting that on Krishna?
So
you know the truth.
So well, okay. Well, so if there was other people, then thank you very much. But cultural competency training is something that we've added because we recognised there was a gap in our understanding how people viewed health and illness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So I've got a quick question, and that is about the consultation. I'm surprised by the lack of data on your consultation here. So, for example, the number of people that responded, the number of people that were asked. So I'm always being very mean to our own officers, as some of them will attest, about setting ourselves standards of how many people we ask. What do we think before we get the answers? What do we think is a reasonable response rate? Because if we don't get that, then we haven't done the consultation right, which goes back to points that 20 about. And I think before you set off on these journeys of consultation, I'm sorry I said journeys now, that's jargon. When we set off doing this, we ought to set those parameters to start with and then judge our consultation against. Making it right every time, and sometimes you'll fall short of it, but at least you'll start with an honest approach. And I would really urge you to do that, although you may tell me that that's not possible and that I've asked the wrong question. But I think that's again tied in with accessibility, because if you're setting yourself those goals for engaging and getting responses, then I think you're helping yourself in future with reach of your services. How would you respond to that criticism? Is that fair?
We do have some harder data that we haven't included in the packs, with the wish of keeping things as short as possible. But we do have records of how many responses and some further breakdowns and some further data. So what you have here is a summary, but we do know how important it is to understand how successful we've been in reaching out. And there's also something around hearing what preferences are in terms of how people would like to have the conversation as well. So we know that we can't sit still with that, and actually that engagement has to be on the terms of people we are serving and the communities we are having the conversation with. So that's something we want to hold.
I think it could be more transparent in future reports, because this is a very important aspect of the report, possibly less words and fewer words and more figures. But I mean, if I look at page 52, basically they look like there are 188 responses to something, which seems quite low to me, and that may be unfair of me, but tell me why that's unfair. In future reports, I'm not expecting an answer to that now. That's just an overall, because I'm expecting that we will have a report like this in the future. And when I do, I'm just trying to set this committee's expectations. Now I'm going to take a very short intervention because I'm very keen to open up.
Intervention following Councillor Gardner's, the answer to Councillor Gardner's question, which was about GP access. And I was very interested to hear about the work that you're doing to improve access to GPs. As a Nottingham councillor, I had constituents who came to me, including bereavement survivors, who are having real difficulties accessing the GP. I would say I have those difficulties myself. I won't name practice, but it's very near to Grenfell's for years. And I just wondered whether the work that you talked about doing there on improving access, is that applying specifically to Nottingdale and to the community in particular? And then just quickly following Sydney's question, where there's no uptake in out of area children, could that be anything to do with a barrier such as distance, transport, or journey time? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who'd like to respond to those?
So the access work is both North West London. There's a piece of work which is all over North West London, and which we are implementing in West London. There's also the West London work as well, which is for RBKC and Queen's Park and Paddington. What we do is we look, and this group does look, the North Kensington Recovery Team does look at the access figures to see if there's an issue, because we get the same reports that you get, Councillor, about difficulties getting access. So if there are issues around a particular practice that draw attention, then we go and investigate what those issues are, and that will continue going forward.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to open this to the floor. So I'm going to invite councillors in the audience if you'd like to go first. Emma doesn't want to. Owen, do you want to ask anything?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you very
As
much.
concisely as your colleagues.
Yes, just following up. Actually, I made a note on that regarding the GP. But yeah, thank you very much for resetting the clock regarding what's been going on for a long time, recognizing there is a traumatized community you are dealing with here. So you are doing a different research. So my question is really, does it really worry you that from the start of the 14th of June 2017 until now, we are going to the 8th anniversary of this tragedy, that if you look around, building on what my colleague in Nottingdale, I picked one single point, which I've witnessed, I've seen it, and you will expect a first-class service in our medical community, as well as our local provisions, in particular within the 500 meters of Grenfell Tower. So if you can see and focus on one aspect, I would like to see the first-class service, even within that immediate community, because the budget is time. As many said here, it's a long-term issue, provision, and how the quality of data you are trying to capture is going to feed within any future model, which you recognize is so complex. There are so many complex parameters you are dealing with. Jargons, my fellow councillor highlighted on the different parameters. So you try to devise some measure to fit all, where we are as well, you are focusing on personalized provision and services. So how do you foresee tangible evidence regarding the opening hours of GP practice? Yeah, I've seen myself, an elderly person, 8:15, in cold weather, just sitting at the door, where that clinic should have been opened at 8 o'clock. And that was
Can I ask for a response on that?
Yeah, I mean that shouldn't be happening, and that's why we know there's a piece of work we have to do about access and make sure that that's easier. I certainly share your aspiration that we create an improving and good service and better service for the survivors, but generally speaking for the residents in North Kensington, because we know they were previously underserved by the healthcare system, so we want to make that better. We don't rely just on our own review of data and information, and we invite other people to come in and check it, and we work with Anne Raleigh on looking at the data that we're producing as well, and make sure that it makes sense and that we're looking at the right data and we're not missing anything. The one area that may be of interest, and Councillor, we came to your meeting a few weeks ago, and what we were able to demonstrate there is that in cancer screening services, we've seen an improvement in the north of the borough, whereas we would normally expect areas of deprivation or poverty to be on the bottom of any kind of league table, we've seen an improvement. There's still an awful long way to go. There's an awful long way to go. I absolutely accept that. But we do, it's encouraging that maybe some of the work that we've started in partnership with the local authority and the voluntary sector groups might be having an impact. But I completely agree with your aspiration.
And Chair, can I just quickly follow up?
Very quick.
Extremely, 30 seconds, even less. Regarding measurable outcome, I mean, these, that's why I'm focusing on some processes where this can be easily measured, monitored, and acted upon. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, we're very happy to share the metrics that we're measuring, that on measurable things on improved same-day access into primary care, as well as the extended services that we've been putting in place, and that we measure that by practice, by groups of practice.
And I'm sure Lucy's committee will be interested.
Yeah.
Now, I know Emma's changed her mind, which she's entitled to do. I would like to ask a question, and then I'll go.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to say this issue about accessing appointments. When I came to the meeting in January and discovered that I was supposed to have an annual grantor-related health check, I was absolutely delighted. I hadn't had one for many years, and I've been suffering from cancer. I'm clear now, but I found it quite surprising. So okay, this is great. I need to get an appointment. So you go to the you can't get an appointment over the counter, as it were. You have to get there at 8:30 in the morning on phone. And you're in competition with somebody who's been up all night with a sick baby. Yeah. So I'm accused of okay, go online. It literally took me half an hour, and I'm quite an intelligent person, to work out how to get an appointment online. And I was so delighted when I did it, and I've never been able to find anybody else who's managed to get an appointment online. This is so complicated. It's worse than getting a driver's license. It's worse than getting.
So Emma's personal trial.
It's just
a challenge to you.
But this is my my GP who's got 2,000 patients. I'm clearly not the only one, so this idea of access, whereas my annual health check, I've one now, but that's fine. Some of this just isn't. It doesn't ring true. I'm sorry. This is just experience for people on the ground.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open it up to, I know Josh wants to speak, but I'm going to come back to it at the end because I've sort of thrown it open to the floor. So the gentleman here, then Melanie, and then Natasha.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is a line of what's been talked about, but we've been engaging quite closely with the NHS, and for the last year, we've been talking about what they call it, the transition period, which is 24. I don't know how they put it, the year of transition. But anyway, we're not talking about that much. But from there, we had a commitment from the ICB in the name of Mr. Rob Hurd, as they replied to our complaint letter about some misuse of some of the resources that disappeared, and we haven't been used in the community setting. So we still haven't got a response to that. So I'm sorry to have to bring it to now, but because Mr. Rob is leaving as well, so he's given us commitment, but this is not personal. This is just facts. I'm talking about facts, not talking about anything. Now, the question is, the commitment you said, we're going to have a community-led recovery, and we're going to deal with health inequality. Now, in this report, you're telling us we are moving, or we are transitioning to place-based partnership and integrated neighborhood team model. Something we've never been informed about, or talked about, or had any consultation on. And now that is supposed to be happening in Northwest London as part of the ICB. The question also about the allocation of the resources. So you have at the council, they are developing 24, 28, you are developing 25, 29. How are you going to align that? Because those resources, we want you to know how much resources are available for the community, and are those resources reinforced or Grenfell specific, rather than the service that you provide generally in 40 million people in Northwest London.
Rob, I don't know if you want to respond on the particular question about resources, but then there's also a question again about, which I was going to draw a point at the end, is concerned about hypothecation essentially, and how we address that in the future.
Yeah, so I think I apologise for my sort of NHS jargon, but the whole concept of the community-led response and neighbourhood team approach is the same thing. It's a continuation of attempting to get a more locally focused, community-led neighbourhood approach to that, and the terminology around the North Kensington integrated neighbourhood team translates into how we're going to get those community providers, mental health providers, those services, and the teams are engaging the community to bring that together in a more joined up way. I'm very happy to go and look at the lack of response you talked about to a letter.
Probably better dealt with outside the meeting, but if you'd like to make check out the time.
In terms of I know there has been a lot of disquiet around, it wasn't the £50 million and the resources that have been expended. I would say that in terms of using those resources to ensure that we have access to services for that, I've acknowledged as an issue in terms of how we've got the value out of that in terms of having its impact. That is why we need to make sure we design services and improve on our impact. And if there's more information that we haven't provided on that, we'll do so. And the ring fencing issue, I think the means to that end is to ensure that recognition and the needs assessment is permanently there in the NHS's strategy.
I think in your communications as well, you need to kind of outline why you've got how much more you've got as a result of that aspect of the needs assessment to all of us. I think we all would appreciate that information in future if it's not going to be sort of officially ring-fenced. Thank you. Okay, so Helen.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you for coming here. It is good to see you. It's been a little while. I'm Melanie Wolf, and I run along with colleagues in the community, North Kensington Community Kitchen, and we respond to the dire inequalities and poverty across not only Nottingdale but across North Kensington. We feed we share food, I should say, with hundreds of people a week. We around 65 to 70% are children, from very young children through to our youth. So we have quite a good idea of what's happening on our own ground, so to speak. We would, of course, like to know more about the funds for future years, how they're going to be solidified, how they're going to be, as Noah has said, how they're going to be ring-fenced and kept for all of us. It's very nice to be able to sit here and for everyone to be polite, which is, of course, good and wonderful. However, it is quite horrific to be talking about future deaths. For many, the thought of the destruction of the tower, thinking about the contamination that we've all breathed in, and again, future deaths, people who are already dying, adequate testing for anything really, but particularly the issue of toxicity and contamination is a huge issue for so many of us. The GPs, we talk about going to GPs, but they won't. Not all GPs will recognise that things are Grenfell related. I've got a child born and bred here. It can take 3 weeks to get, and this is at the moment. It can take 3 weeks to get an appointment. It's incredibly frustrating. It's very hard, even for us within our community. It's very hard to keep people engaged when there are no outcomes that they see as relative to them. And I think that's what I'd like to bring it back to, which is what's actually happening in our communities. What's the received care that we're getting? And we do appreciate all of your the work that's gone into this. Thank you very much for that. But you're talking about peer-led, community-based, all of these things, community-led recovery.
Melanie, can I just encourage you to answer, simply ask the
Yes,
question?
yes, but I do feel this is really, it is really, really important because we've been asking for what you're talking about now. We've been asking for this since the original Grenfell Scrutiny committees. And that was, what was that, a few months after the fire they started? So this has been years and years and years. Mental health, severe issues in our communities. There's no adequate outreach. We see the effects daily. There are suicides. My neighbour was murdered. SEN, children and youth, particularly concerning. It's really dreadful. And I'm sorry, but everyone here should know about the services that have been rescinded. Parkside Clinic being closed down straight after Grenfell has had a massive, massive impact within our community. As for Dr. Steeden, thank you for letting us know about the Twin Towers learning and the contamination. Is it possible to share this learning? You know, Imperial's coming on board. How are we going to get this information? How can we start communicating to all of us, not parts of our community, but to all of us? Everybody in the community is important. We did start with CNWL, some comms within our community some time ago, and it just stopped. We stopped hearing from you. So basically, I am finishing now. This is taking forever. Almost 8 years. We're losing lives. What are we actually going to get and when? We'd like solid information about the delivery. We'd like follow-up. We'd like to know more about the actual funds for us. For example, what's left from the original allocations? Where's it going? What's going to happen? And how is it going to happen?
Who's going to respond to that?
Yeah. So, well, I think I've acknowledged throughout that we're clearly not answering the exam question, and this has gone on for a long time. We have, in terms of, well, I'll start with the last point on the resources. Essentially, the money has been spent, whether it's felt that it's been spent on the right things and achieved the utilisation and the access to services. I can only acknowledge that is not felt to be the case. I think Karen, I might ask Karen and Andy to comment on the extent to which we can have confidence that this will now feel different going forward based on the work that we've done to date, but that that we will be presenting the actual tangible service changes and things that we're putting in place that are different to, which require us to do things differently in future, that which has been in place from the past. I can't see any other answer for us to give at this point.
Sorry, Rob. Could you also explain why it's taken so long to get to this point?
Can you do it through the chat?
Again, I think. Again, I'm in danger of repeating myself, and I do apologise because I realise I'm not sort of getting the issue. I think we have struggled to find a ways and means for translating what we've attempted to do with community liaison and involvement into a feeling that is turning into tangible outcomes and services that are different to, and as we've described, built into how NHS services are provided. It's extremely complex to create in a health system how those additional things are added on, organised in addition to the standard services that the NHS provides. We've attempted to do that. We've attempted to fund that over and above those services, and we've attempted to work with those providers on trying to make that happen. I don't think I'm going to be, I don't know if Cameron Remedy wants to talk about what assurances have we got that this time we're going to be able to, it's going to feel.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, just, I mean, accepting that we haven't got it right before and that we'll probably make mistakes going forward, I think what we can promise is an ongoing conversation around what your concerns are and how services are shaped and delivered going forward. And that's an integral part of the way that the neighbourhood delivery will be going forward. Hopefully, we get that right, and that's presumably something will be scrutinised and challenged on as we start to deliver that as well.
I'm going to move on, Melanie.
Yeah, sure, but sorry, could you please just, if we could ask, when is this neighbourhood, when is this actually going to happen? It's been almost 8 years.
So the neighbourhood work is we anticipate will be part of the 10-year review. So it's a national programme. It's not just North West London or North East, but it is something we've been working on locally for a year, and it's beginning to deliver some services, but in a very small way. And so we anticipate over the next year or so that you'll see more. And if you don't, or if you're not getting it right, then there will be opportunities to have your input into that as well.
Thank you. Natasha?
Yeah. So I'm going to bring a different perspective because I've listened to a lot of what I would call waffle this evening. Because what you're doing is taking the whole of the Grenfell community down the garden path. Because what you don't have is data on the survivors that made it out of that building that night. There's not been adequate long-term health monitoring of the survivors. So before you even think about what Melanie's spoken about, people dying and all the different toxins and everything else within the community, you don't have the data on the survivors that made it out of the building that night. And it was one of the points that the coroner made. And when I look through your response in respect to the coroner's 8 points, every last one of them says a primary care-led enhanced health check. Emma just spoke about a primary led health enhanced health check. Guess what, Emma? Me and you have the same check. So every year, me and you will have the same check. You tell me how you know for me that got out at 4:47 a.m. that morning has any health concern different to Emma.
Peak flow, that's it.
Peak flow.
Peak flow.
Yeah, you get a lung function test if
That's
you're
it.
lucky. Yeah. You tell me how you haven't been for the last 8 years. And I will say, all right, I'll give you a grace of a year. For the last 7 years, we're leading this community down the garden path. They're talking about resources and misappropriating, how you spent the money. It's a question we've been asking for many, many months, Rob. Many years. We've been asking how you spent it. Half of it, mental health, GHWS, you can definitely say how you spent that money. You've done a lot quoting them tonight, how you commissioned the dedicated service, how you've done the culture appropriate work. Sorry, Krishna did the culture appropriate. That wasn't the case. You've done a lot of saying how wonderful GHWS is, and you're right to do that because they have delivered for this community. But from a physical health point of view, you haven't. And you haven't done it with the survivors, which is what Regulations 28 set out. It didn't set out for the community from a long-term health monitoring. But what you did was you commissioned the GP Federation and you gave them a lot of money last year to deliver enhanced health checks. What you did was told the minister that there was going to be a bespoke service for the survivors. That's never materialised. Year 6, when Professor Chris Whitty said that's what you needed to do, you've never delivered on it, and we're now at year 8. If you don't sit here and tell people you think they want to hear, what you guys need to start doing is telling the truth, because you have no data. Even when you look through some of these figures, 500 appointments, but then you haven't broken it since 2020. What does that even mean? The only thing you can confidently sit here and say is the paediatrics, and you're talking about children that live out of borough. Well, there was only 74 survivors, but you've added, and I get that. For me, as I've always maintained, and in the last Michael Gove meeting, you committed to ensuring that there would be adequate provisions for the children for life. In the last Michael Gove public meeting that he held in March last year, you absolutely sat there and said that children would be looked after for life. And that's children of the whole North Kensington community. But what you cannot do is sit here and say that everything's going to be wonderful and great when you know and I know that you don't have the finances to take this service forward. You know and I know that the GP extra 20 minutes have all come to an end because the GP Federation are delivering it out of St Charles. You know and I know that the GP Federation with the enhanced health checks are cold calling everybody to get them in to access the service. Yeah. I've got the messages on my phone and I do mine through my GP. They're cold calling people, and you knew this from last year. So don't sit here and tell people that there's going to be all of these provisions. Tell the truth. There isn't. There isn't going to be money for this community because you squandered the money that there was for this community. And he was going to sit here and say there's constraints as to why you can't talk about the business case. There's constraints of why you can't talk, because the minister pulled you over the coals again. Not for the first time. Because they're very much aware. Because can I just say something? Councillor
can, I
Ward?
want
Sorry,
to
one
focus on
thing.
this
One thing. I know you. Right now, let me just say one thing.
Yeah, of course.
I have every piece of evidence that I could present to everybody in this room, from promises to what was supposed to be delivered. And I'm dating back to 2018, when we had everybody in the room, when Public Health England said that Grenfell was nothing more than a house fire. And that's where the £50 million come from. Because we went to Theresa May and asked for that money. So don't you dare sit here and say, oh, well, we've done our best and we haven't got it right. It's taken you 8 years to acknowledge you haven't got it right. And then we're meant to trust you for the next 4 or 5 years with our health. But you couldn't even tell me what's going on inside my body because there's no one looking at my data. There's people that have long-term health issues as a result of the fire that refuse to go to services because of how badly they've been let down. And they're survivors. So you can't sit here and say that everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's about time that the ICB tell the truth. And every single person sitting on their desk, all your jobs are safe, right? Because what you're going to do is continue to milk this community for a little bit longer so that you get paid. Because that's how it feels. Because you've already said, oh, we'll still be here, but everyone else is getting cut by 50%. If it was up to me, you'd all be cut. If it's up to me, let us go back to business as usual. Let us go back to the fact can't get into Fallen. We all know it's Fallen you were talking about. Can't get into Fallen Medical Centre when you can't shed loads of money into Fallen. Shed loads of money. So where's that money gone, Rob? It's that empty well of primary care that you filled the gap. That's where that money's gone.
Natasha, can I pick up? Yeah, absolutely. Point that you made about health checks. That was one of the points that I particularly picked up, which was concerning about whether or that they don't tell or that there's no such thing, and there was a 20 minutes. Can you respond on that?
So there were commissioned a range of services which included enhanced GP access, which wasn't specifically for survivors, although survivors can have access to it. That was a general service that we encourage GPs to offer and incentivize them to do so. With regard to the monitoring of the impact of the fire, you did mention the paediatric service which Mando runs, which is ongoing, and Mando is continuing to run that, monitor that, and arrange a transmission. How do we move people from childhood into adulthood and make sure that we can maintain their screening. So that's a service that's developing too. Alongside that too, I don't know if you've accessed this, but Laura Martin's respiratory.
She worked part-time. You employed her 18 months ago. She's meant to be analysing the data. It's never really, and at the end of the day, what data is she analysing? Because you've already said there's no uptake. You're already saying that there's not enough people coming through the service, so much so that you're offering it to everybody. You cannot say to anyone sitting here who's talking about people within the community about toxin and everything else that's about to come as a result of that. Sorry, no, Councillor Will, sorry, I've sat here for an hour and a half listening to them waffle and not even give direct answers. So I just need to respond to that. At the end of the day, that tower's coming down. We already saw what we saw with soil contamination back in 2018. We're going to have a whole community that's not only going to go through anxieties around health, but you've got nothing, there's no baseline data because you've never taken it. There's no baseline data from any of us. So how can you measure from the beginning if there's no baseline data? And it don't matter whether you've got Laura Martin or you've got whoever, Bob Martin, I don't care. But there's been no data capturing in that respect.
So I was referring to the respiratory monitoring service. I don't know if that's what you were.
But it's long-term health monitoring. What does health monitoring mean?
So certainly we have data, and we share data with Anna and the public health team to try and work out that. We publish it as well. Now there may well be pieces of information that we, as new things, as we become aware of new issues, then there are new pieces of data that we might start to pick up on as we go forward. We are looking for changes by impacts of the fire. We're just as concerned as everybody else is about the potential impact, which is why we've had conversations with Professor Stack and with other bodies around, what services should we have in place, what monitoring should we be doing, what are the things that we should be looking out for. But we don't know the answers to that. No one, unfortunately, knows the answers to that. There are suspicions around things that might happen, and so we have screening services in place. People have access to, so people get CT scans when they go to the respiratory monitoring service. And as new technology comes along, there'll be new services. Laura's, there's already talk about a cancer blood check, which is hopefully going to become available at some point. We're talking to the Firefighters Union, Firefighters Research around how they were monitoring altered DNA, potentially as a result of exposure to fire. But that's an ongoing conversation, because even that study isn't able to definitely say that was the cause. And so, but we're having those conversations because we're just as curious and concerned as everybody else.
There's an overall perception that the data following through of the cohort isn't clear enough and about what they're getting. And I think when we're talking about the next report that we see here, I think we'd like to see that. I completely appreciate that the numbers are small and that has anonymity issues, but we would like to see some more hard data following through that cohort, both the narrower and the wider cohort, and what services they have been able to access in some detail. Melanie, I'm not going to come back to you because there are other people waiting to hear. There's a gentleman behind you.
It's important.
Just really briefly, I was a little bit shocked to hear after 8 years we're talking about hard to reach communities, because it strikes me that the hard to reach communities we're talking about are exactly the community that Natasha was talking about. People who are deciding not to access services because they don't have trust. After 8 years, the question is, after 8 years, what are you going to do to build that trust to enable Natasha's cohort to come forward and others?
The key for this is about it's going back to the engagement and making sure that we reach out and keep reaching out to listen and to action. I think.
You know what? You're an absolute joke, a lot of you. An absolute joke. And I swear to God, every time I sit in a room with you and listen to the same waffle time and time again, minutes from meetings, time and time again, it's an absolute disgrace that you can actually even think that you can treat the friends of a community like this after what happened, and sit in the building where those people that created what happened and have the same audacity to do exactly to us what was happening to us pre-fire. It's exactly what you guys are doing now.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, you've been waiting very patiently.
I must concur with what Natasha says and a number of other people. Just a couple of questions. When you're looking at actually collecting data, what is it? That you still use these terms that are so meaningless called engagement and surveys? Our community are surveyed out. If it's not RBKC giving us 24 surveys about something or another, you're using exactly the same techniques. There are other ways of collecting data. I mean, try and be a bit creative. I'm not going to tell you how to do your job. You're probably paid triple or millions of times more than me. But you're not going to collect any data in this way. So I really think if you want to go forward to actually access some of these hard to reach communities, they're not hard to reach. I mean, I live in a community. They're not hard to reach, but you use these perpetual methods that actually fail. So that's something to think going forward. And then the other question I want to ask you is that Jim Mackey, the NHS boss, said, and you're talking about what you're going to be able to deliver going forward. Jim Mackey said on Friday, he defended the budget cuts and said that the cuts are going to be eye-watering. Yeah, and that would lead to service closures and cuts to staffing. Now you're telling us something different. How is this, what is it that's made CNW special? Because when I read this, I think, well, you surely can't be excluded from this.
Thank you. Very trenchant questions.
There's two. I mean, Carol was answering, but without using the phrase engagement, the way we're trying to do the involvement differently this time onto that. Because, first of all, I'm going to apologise deeply because I can hear the strength feeling that continues. And I know those may feel like empty words, but they are deeply felt. The
as I say, what we've tried to do is set an invest in involvement team to get that. We commit to working more closely with the local authority, other people, and learn about how we can get out there or get the data to be used inside the community involvement in designing their service. In terms of the Jim Mackey cuts, what I'm trying to distinguish, people are here today, between the how are we ring fencing, if you like, the potential for financial challenge of the NHS from those of the Grenfell community, and what I'm describing is there is, of course, everybody is affected by the scale of resources that are in the NHS and the extent to which we've got. I think that what you're referring to is the 50% cuts that we were talking about earlier. But those, as I said, are not directly then flowing through to a cut in the types of things we are talking about here today. That's talking about the back office services, the support infrastructure, and it means that it's not the cuts in the teams that are working on the clinical services that are being provided to that community. So those cuts are to do with the 50% are to do with the reduction in the administrative overheads, the bureaucratic infrastructure, the layers, the National Health Service. They are not reductions in the clinical services.
Although some of them you've got, they needed to run the service.
Josh, did you want to say?
Just very briefly, Mary, and I don't want to take away from anyone, especially residents, impact on this, but I just want to say that Rob, myself, the leader, Maxine as chief exec, and Callum met with Rob and Penny, the chair of the ICB, a few months ago to discuss many of these issues that were raised tonight. And I was slightly disappointed that despite our conversations, that didn't come to the forefront. We're still having the same conversation now, despite it being raised at the top level. And just from my 2 cents, this is I don't want to take away from anyone's or what they said, but this is a big report that says a lot of things, but at the same time, it says nothing. So I don't know if it's a bit of a bombardment of information. One question, though, if I may, Chair, is just regarding the implementation and co-delivery. So you mentioned in the report that new models of care are expected to begin place and take effect from October, and then you talk about talking with bereaved survivors and the wider community about it. Now, October is quite soon. Secondly, we've got the anniversary in June. Then we have summer holidays where children are off or you're looking after parents or doing that stuff. And then we have the issue of the tower as well. And all those things going on in the community that impact one upon itself. Then to ask at the same time, oh, by the way, what do you think of the new model of care? I think it's going to completely dilute what you're trying to achieve or what the community wants. So I'm just asking have you thought about that? And if so, how are you going to mitigate all those big events coming up in the next few months?
Thank you, Josh.
Can I just that just to say that I think we've heard frustration in the room. There's nothing new in this report. We knew all this already. And really, I think we need to know what plans are in place before the decision is made on the tower, like when it's actually going to, what's going to happen and when. And also, really, there should have been something in place before the 8th anniversary. Nobody knows what support's available.
Okay, so there's two specific events, but that are causing concern, and we'd like your reflections on those, and also the other things that Josh has mentioned.
So I think what we've got to say is we've got to come back with a specific timeline of what the proposed service is around those dates are going forward.
Sorry, I was realising something you wanted to ask the person. Thank you.
So we'll provide a specific set of these are the timelines, these are the services around those dates.
That would be very helpful. I'm just going to circulate that. Thank you. Sorry, the lady over there wanted to.
Can he not answer the mitigation question that Josh asked?
Sorry, you're absolutely right. Mitigating the events, the tower. What plans do you have in place? Not just in terms of timeline, but what services?
Yes, so I mean, in terms of June, we recognise that is a month when there is a lot of activity. We don't want to be holding involvement, engagement sessions at an appropriate time. We'll be led either side of that month and also on the best way to do it. as well. So we do understand that that would not be optimal timing to be conducting significant engagement. But I think it will be a mixture of communication and involvement, because we're hearing really clearly that people want to know what plans are. So we should be signaling that. Also working with our community groups so that we can do that in the best way possible.
Okay.
Obviously, it's more of a bit of a clarification, actually, just from a question earlier, because I work in the Grenfell Wellbeing Service, and you asked about the mental health part and like distinguishing it between non-Grenfell or Grenfell. It's quite easy to distinguish for mental health what is Grenfell specific in our service, just because we do an assessment, and if they are coming to process the trauma around Grenfell or depression that maybe it's turned into, or anxiety, and they're talking about and they want to come in to discuss that and have maybe therapy or occupational therapy or anything, around that, then they will come in if they were affected by Grenfell before, and then maybe there's a car crash or something completely different and they were needed to talk about that, then we would send them to sister services so there's not duplication. So it gets a bit more complicated with children, but if their parents maybe were affected, or their school or their housing, then they will cover. So there is that flexibility around the children, but if with enough assessment and enough kind of talking about it, maybe over a couple of sessions, you do find out if there's the Grenfell link that we should take on, or they should be moved into other services that are already provided for.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Now, I know Claire just wanted to say one more thing, and then I'm going to draw this conclusion.
Yes.
Then I'm going to draw the discussion to a conclusion, because we've been going 2 hours and we've got 2 very important Grenfell papers after this. So, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start by saying this is really important, because this is about preventing future deaths, among other things. Now, Natasha has mentioned the coroner's 8 recommendations. I have some of them here with me. For bereaved and survivors and first responders, there should have been risk evaluation, regular health screening, access to guidance and information. They should oversee and coordinate and provide appropriate mental health support, including for local residents, and minimise persons affected slipping through the net. Now, it's really alarming, and I trust that it would be equally alarming to the whole committee to hear that that doesn't seem to have been happening for 8 years. And I know that we've had items on this. We haven't had Grenfell scrutiny for a long time, and that may be something to do with how we got to the years. But this is really, really alarming, and I don't know what the obstacles are, why we've got to this point, why is it like this? What's the obstacle around funding when we have commitments from Prime Minister? How can we move forward from this to actually put right what's gone wrong? Because I don't think people are particularly confident or convinced that that's the case. And I think it's one thing to acknowledge that we haven't got things right, but it's another thing to actually put in place something as serious as the monitoring of providers of that tower. How have we not got data?
Thank you. I'm going to draw I'm going to draw a couple of themes. I may not manage to cover everything, but that we feel strongly about as a room, really, as a community, but also things that maybe should be included in future reports and your future approach to us. So really, there were lots of questions about reach and access, the 2 sides of the same coin, maybe, and holding yourselves up to a higher standard of reporting on data of how you've engaged, how many people you've engaged with. Are they properly spread across the community, the right percentages of people? What were you expecting and have you received it? We've talked about the monitoring of individuals, particularly survivors, and data on that, and data generally for the community. So seeing what's been happening over the years, how many people have been seen. We want to make sure that nobody's fallen through the net and that everybody's had the services that they want. And we can't really tell that in this paper. So I think, those are possibly the 2 strongest themes that have come through. I know there's been some concerns, for example, about that, and I had a question which I didn't read out because I think it had been covered about the 500 metres and needing assurance that if you live outside that, you'll still get the services. I think we got that from you, but I think that needs to be clear. And there's a real concern about whether that, if without real solid hypothecation, whether this community can be absolutely certain that the right funds are being allocated to Grenfell. Having said all that, thank you very much for coming here.
Can I just, my name is Nick, I'm survivor from the tower. I've had over the years the respiratory stuff, but it's quite shocking for me, all this information that's coming in. Because on Friday, I'm going to have my first 4-hour extended thing. And where I was going to take my blood things for the first time to check on stuff. And this is, I've been sick over the years. And now just to find out, like, over nearly 8 years along, it's going to be my first time for extended enhancement checks. That's going to take my blood and everything.
I think you're going to take that.
Yeah.
Told the right people.
Yeah.
Thank
And I came out like not Natasha, but after 2:30. So it's shocking that it's the first time that I'm going to have this stuff.
Cameron, I'm going to encourage you to respond very quickly because I'm going to bring this discussion to an end.
So I believe that may be on the back of an invitation to personalised health assessment. We will be following up every single one of those with patient
There's a
experience.
question about what happened before or what didn't happen before, which is.
I've had the respiratory ones over the years. That's back in my lungs and everything, I think.
Thank you.
And
I'm going to bring it to them.
Sorry, can I just add a step? Sorry, just 1 second. Anna Steck laid out the testing that we needed to have done years ago. That way we can get the data. When can these tests be done? Starting with those who are actually in the tower. That's the only way we're going to get the data. It's a huge effort. When can that be done? It's a vital. Without that, the rest falls apart.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to turn to the next paper. Thank you, Dan. Next paper. Thank you.
Or can we go after?
My next paper is an update on the future of investment support. Yeah. We're going to make agenda items. Wait, given the lateness of the hour, can I ask you to make a very succinct, because I know that all my committee will have read this paper. I'll ask you to do a very succinct introduction. Joe, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We'll keep it very brief. Just to say this is an update on the progress on the 3 Grenfell support programmes. We last brought a report to the committee in November of last year when we were just about to finalise some of the final details of the community support model. And since then, the new cycle of opt-in, opt-out decisions from bridging survivors and a new cycle of personal budgets. The most significant progress has been on the Grenfell support. And so you'll see some of the figures in the paper from the end of April, but actually we've got some updates of what we're speaking tonight as well. I think probably underemphasised in the paper are some of the challenges we've had in rolling out the new support, particularly with the changeover from IGC to Oracle, which has meant the payment of household wellbeing grants has been a bit delayed, and some unforeseen problems with the Leisure Centre about rolling out the memberships, but I'm happy to talk more about that this evening. The education training work at an earlier stage, but good progress on moving towards the launch of the Education Hub in September. We focused in these reports on delivery, reach and impact. I think it's fair to say this report is more focused on delivery and reach programs. We expect some of the data around impact and satisfaction and the kind of broader questions about the outcomes to come with future reports. And you'll have seen in the report that we will, as of this month, I hope, have the benefit of the independent scrutiny from a new independent scrutiny function, which alongside your comments hopefully will help us strengthen the monitoring of the programme and indeed ensure there's adequate scrutiny of the delivery.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start on this side this time.
Thank you, Joe. I have 4 questions. First, on page 20, 3.15. You talk about the outcomes, just satisfactory and or highly satisfactory, but there's no breakdown of numbers. So I would love to have that. What numbers are you doing on that?
Thank you, Councillor.
Should I give you all my questions?
Oh yeah, as you wish. Yeah.
And then I have on page 27, 5.17. You mentioned that we've already committed to minimizing the amount of evidence requested from applicants. Are you maintaining the minimum requirements of eligibility? Page 29, on the door knocking, number of residents engaged with. You talk about the number of doors that are knocked upon was 549. So, and 366 did not answer. So I would like to know what was the follow-up on 366? Was there no mention of that? And on page 30, it's a bit, I think there's something that there's a huge disparity, sorry, 0.5.34. You mentioned that 69% disclosed having one or more disability. But then in your last point, you say that the long-term condition not there was 18%. There's a huge disparity within those figures. So I would like some clarification on that.
Thank you.
Please.
Great, thank you, Councillor. On the first question, the number related in 3.15 is set out in 3.14. So the percentages are of those support requests that have come through the system that are being closed. I'm sorry, the paper wasn't closed.
Okay, thank you.
And on 5.17, so no, that's right. What we've done is tried, as we've said, to minimise the amount of information that people provide. So where possible, we've done an automatic check using council tax records or other records that the council already has access to make sure that people who are giving their address at the time of file, we can match them. Where that's not possible, we've asked for additional information. So in every case, we're fulfilling the minimum eligibility requirements. We're just doing it without people having to provide additional information where they can. On page 29, so there was some door knocking that happened early when the Grenfell Community Advocacy Team first started. Since then, they focused more on drop-ins in key community locations. As part of the next phase of the work, they are going of engagement. They are going to restart some of those door knockings. I think in the first instance, some of that door knocking. In the first instance, they'll look to door knock in some of the other areas, but then absolutely we will go back when we have a record of who we weren't able to contact, so that we can follow up with them again. But since they did that door knocking, because we had applications from almost 1,900 people, quite a few of whom wanted support from the community advocacy team, the priority has been following up first with them and then doing some of that broader outreach. On your final point, I think that's really significant finding. It is a big disparity. I think probably if you compared some of the statistics to the particular cohort that we have reached so far, the disparity would be smaller. So we have overwhelmingly reached people through this new programme who live in social housing, which I think tends to have a higher rate of people with disabilities, but we can certainly look into that in a bit more detail. And I think we will also, as we continue to build the number of applicants, we'll continue to work out whether or not this is kind of broadly representative of the area. And I think there is a question about the Nottingdale area is home to some very wealthy residents who might not want or need to access the support. And so there is a genuine question, I think, about what the ceiling is for the number of people who are likely to come forward to access this support and what their profile is.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just 2 very quick questions. On page 27, bullet 5.18, you mentioned Oracle there and implementation. And just in the last sentence, you talk about continuing to process new requests when we can. I get some understanding of how long it takes to process the request, because it's not clear when we can, but it's not a measure.
Thank you, Councillor. No, that's a fair challenge, and that's the question that we've been trying to resolve since Oracle launched at the end of April. The challenge is there are a number of steps to the process, but the challenge is to provide assurances that they can do those in bulk, process it in bulk. We originally made a commitment to process them within
4 weeks, I think, and actually we hope we'll be able to do it in 2 weeks. I think that will be possible. Where that hasn't been possible is with the backlog that we've had since we've had the payments freeze. And so we haven't, since Oracle launch, been able to make the number of payments that I would have hoped, which means that some people have been waiting for a long time. So I am hopeful that by the end of May, we will have processed the backlog, and going forward, we will be able to process those payments where we have all the relevant information within 2 weeks.
So just so I'm clear, the 280 outstanding will be processed within the next 4 weeks of May.
Well, I hope that they will be processed by the end of May, the backlog that we have, and I think it's now closer to 300. Have some more applicants, but then going forward, we will have a clearer sense of how quickly, and I hope that will be within 2 weeks.
Great, thank you. And then my final question was on page 36, the top bullet point at the top of the page. The annual bursary, the second line, it says with bursaries up to, and then it says £15K.
So that's right.
Yeah. What is that?
It's up to no, it's only versus up to 1.5 a year for eligible children and young. The point should be between the 1 and the 5.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Well,
points. I brought the same things I've said before. The papers were a bit late, and I would beg for them to be a bit shorter in future. There are definitely some typos which are very confusing. Page 19, we go from 3.7 with the heading of 4 and then back to 3.8. The number system is obviously wrong somehow. It's correct in the system. But that's not the only place in the paper. But I think there needs to be more editorial control on these papers for their issue with the request, more substantial request would be there are a large number of acronyms used like integrated working group, and there's one to do with the team and so on, and they refer to different links with different groups. Could we have a diagram which actually shows those links pictorially? Because there are so many things that to get this in a picture tells 1,000 stories, I think is the one to try and think. The second question is please could we have more insight into the problems and successes of the implementation working group process? I can give some examples of where this has worked well and not have worked.
Thanks, Councillor Pascal. And the paper wasn't late, but I agree that it needed a further proofread, because I can see that there are typos, so I apologise for those. And I think more broadly, I appreciate it's a lot of information to process. I think it's always a balance for us in providing the relevant background, partly because there is this complex landscape, but also trying to get to the point and keep it short. So we'll certainly take that feedback on board. We can absolutely provide a diagram of different groups, and in fact of the models, I think more generally might be helpful, so that as a reminder for the committee of what's involved in each of the 3 programmes, and perhaps a visual presentation of that would be clearer than a table or than bullet points. On the implementation steering group, I know we reflected in the report we brought in November about some of the learning, but I think there we were clear when we agreed the original model of the high level model of support for the community back in June of last year, that there were a number of key decisions which still needed to be made, and there were some strong recommendations from the external scrutiny team, and indeed we felt that there needed to be substantive community input into that process, and I think we found those sessions we ran, we must have run about 10 of those sessions between June and December when we finalised the model. We felt that was a really good forum for both hearing challenge from the community, working through some of what were some really difficult questions about where we drew the line in terms of eligibility and how we managed requests, what kind of information we asked people for and what we didn't. And those decisions were made very much in partnership with people, although the community were clear that they were there to provide their steer, and they tasked us on a number of occasions to go away and come up with a few different ways of working. So we've tried to carry some of that forward into the operation steering group, which is its replacement, which is really looking at the service. They had a meeting early this evening, and and they've had through those meetings some challenge, and they've looked at some of the same data that you're looking at tonight, asking questions and showing ways we could improve the model and indeed improve communications about about the model. And I think that communication point was one that we returned to, I know, in the community, but also again and again in the conversations with the community. What more can we do to reach out to people? How can we use more channels, and moving beyond the engagement to actually how do people get messages and how do they get the information that they're most likely to use?
Just to build on that for a second, there's a key learning across availability and regularity as sort of two core components. So we've had working groups post the large consultation that we've done across all of the different work streams on the bereavement survivor area, where we've been engaging very regularly with that cohort with a sort of clear evolution of a similar practice that we've had on the dedicated service in 2019. The appetite for continued change is lower. What they're looking for is the ability to be able to know they can meet with relevant officers when they want to raise concerns and issues. Where we've sort of started to offer things more effectively for the immediate community in areas where we didn't do enough in the past, there is absolutely this continuous desire that Joe spoke to continue to have that ability to see practice change rather than to accept a consultation outcome and assume that's done and dusted. And that learning, I think, is very applicable to some of the other things we're listening to tonight.
And to give one really concrete example, so on the leisure centre membership, we were ready to launch that in the middle of March, and we went with the group and sort of launched that in early March about a deal that we had struck with KLC, and they said it's not good enough, go back and have another go. And so we did, and we managed to negotiate through that a better deal for this cohort, which I think is really positive and a good example of where that kind of community pushback made us think about what more we can do.
Jane, moving to the education. I've got two more.
Well, you could be very
if you don't interrupt, I'll be finished quicker, right? So, Education Hub is, I understand the decision has not yet been made as to where it's going to be. If it's based in the school, which it might be, could we have assurance that there will be access availability to those living particularly outside the borough in times that suit them to get there? Because schools are generally not open after hours, weekends and holidays.
Absolutely, yeah, we can have that assurance, and the conversations that we're having about the different locations all have accessibility, availability, exclusivity of use at the heart.
Okay, the final question is that we have the external scrutiny and we have this scrutiny. How can you give us more insight into how this is complementary and how it can work positively, ultimately for the both contributing towards the benefit of the grateful breed survivors and
Thank you, Councillor. And you're speaking about this scrutiny, you're talking about this committee,
yes.
And I think absolutely. So we've committed to bringing twice a year
with the external as well, working perhaps together.
Absolutely. So we've committed to using twice weekly reports for your committee, but we will also bring to this.
Twice weekly, please.
Perhaps not given the time. Twice yearly, every 6 months, we've committed to bringing a report to this committee. But I think we will also be bringing to this committee, and indeed they will want to share with you separately, as they've been clear, some of their recommendations about our delivery and about the scrutiny and monitoring. So I think that's one opportunity. We are meeting with them next week. I anticipate that probably in the autumn they will do some of their kind of sense-making work that they've talked about, which is looking at the data, talking to bereaved survivors and residents about what it means and what it might mean for the evolution of the programme. And I would have thought they would welcome your participation in that and would be happy to share the outputs from that. So I think there are plenty of opportunities and would suggest perhaps that the chair meets with them directly once they're officially appointed to talk about those opportunities.
I mean, it's essential that we learn from them as well.
Joanna, thank you. It was very promising that 78 new claimants came forward. Is that because of the offer, or is it because can you explain why we've got that new cohort?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So when we had the dedicated service before, you had to live in the country to be eligible for the service. What this form of support for bereaved survivors, essentially claimants who are part of the overarching global assessment process, are entitled to access support no matter where they live. So the vast majority of those 95 new claimants who we've got in that cohort are live abroad. Not all of them, some of whom just hadn't come forwards. And I think the process through settling that the provision and then seeing what the offer was on the table, I think has enabled those to come through.
Okay. And thank you. That then leads on to the fact that you've only got 30% of households living in housing association properties and 48% living in council properties, that you've still got that shortfall that you're just not connecting with. How can we reach those better? Because frankly, those are the figures that probably really do need access to this fund.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right to point, I think, both towards those. So we launched support in February, at the beginning of February. So we are, what, 3 or 4 months on from that point. I think we've paused the engagement because of some of the issues with payments so that we can process what we have had. What we're planning now, after the anniversary, is a new phase of engagement to reach out precisely to those people we haven't managed to reach. I think I am more confident about our ability to reach people who live in council properties, and indeed there's some good evidence of our ability to do that. Where we have genuinely struggled is in the engagement with registered providers. We did a lot of work early on before the launch to look at how we might reach people in housing associations. Of course, people are always free to come as drop-ins, but getting in for door knocking, piggybacking off some of their activity has proved more challenging. But I'm hopeful that partly through some of the connections that we have in our housing needs department with those registered providers, that we will be able to improve that. But I think this data gives us a good indication of where we now need to focus on particular estates or in particular streets where we haven't had an uptake of the offer, but where we think there is time for it.
One quick question on Kids in Literature Centre. I could ask you lots of questions, but I won't. Given that this has been A, very popular, and B, it's based on active monthly membership, can you look at the data to actually check that people are using it? And if they're not, what can we do to encourage them to use it, whether there's a group session or, something that makes them feel comfortable, or an auto aerobic, something that gets them engaged and crossing into the centre of the gym?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, and I think that, so in first instance we will have our priority at the moment has been getting the application sorted, but we have in the agreement we've made with KLC, they have agreed to share routinely, I think every month, data on who is taking up the offer, both so that we understand the financials because we only pay for what people use, but also so that we can do some of that work who perhaps aren't using it as much as we expected, or indeed aren't using it at all, and whether or not it's something they're still interested in. We're also, it's worth saying, developing a kind of alternative offer for some people who understandably don't feel comfortable using a gym that is so close to the tower and that has a direct view of the tower. And so looking at other options in that space to offer that. But I think once we've got some more routine data, we'll be able to look at where we don't have that uptake, and is that because people are no longer interested in the offer, or because there are other issues with accessing KLC or slots or other things like that.
Or it being an intimidating environment, maybe. Great.
Thank you, Mary. Going back to the subject of the reach, so we've got 30% of households or 27% of the population has a visitor claimed. We found a few more through door knocking with a few. There's a bit out there, and we've explained what you're going to do about that. What do you think success looks like in terms of a proportion?
I think, I'm afraid, I don't know. I think there is, we budgeted, for example, on the household wellbeing grants for about 4,000 households out of a total of about 5,500. We did hold some money back as well, so that's not the kind of full picture. I think it was interesting to see the change in application. We had a lot of applications in the first 3-4 weeks, and then they did really start to taper off. And I'm not clear until we do a next round of engagement how much that's because we've reached a ceiling in terms of who's aware of the offer, or we've reached a ceiling in terms of interest. I would hope that at least we get another 1,000 people who apply for the offer, potentially even another 2,000. But I think it would be this next round of engagement that I'd expect to tell us more about, when people are knocking on doors and being told, actually, we still haven't heard about the offer, versus I've heard about it, but it's not right for me, or I don't want to access it.
Encouraging to see, I don't know, greater acceptance of the importance of numbers in your answers than elsewhere, maybe, if I'm being tactful for a moment. Lucy.
You two have just asked my questions, but I was going to say, when does that next round of engagement start, and when do you plan to lift that figure from 30%? I mean, what kind of that uptake?
Yeah, so thanks, and I think we obviously have had we've had some increases in the numbers since then, and I think once we clear some of the priority between now and the anniversary is really to make sure we've cleared the backlog, that everybody got set up with gym memberships who's applied, and that everybody who's applied for a wellbeing grant has received that grant. And then I think in late June we will then restart that process, particularly so that, for example, families who might want to apply for a wellbeing grant over the summer holidays have the opportunity to do that before the summer holidays begin. So I think certainly by the time we have to report to this committee, but I would hope by the end of July we would have a better sense through kind of 5 or 6 weeks of engagement of what that
And it hasn't been that people aren't taking up the offer because they're not. They've been giving you feedback that they don't want to be part of the service.
There are some people who have said that. There are some people who said they haven't wanted or accessed some bits of it, but not others, and chosen not to. Again, that requires a little bit of follow-up. I think at the moment, the balance for us is the resource within the team is trying to make sure we're kind of getting the basics right, and then using all of the data we have to make sure that we're reaching out to people who have told us they don't want to access particular aspects of the offer, or to people we haven't heard from at all.
And I don't think we can underestimate the reality that a lot of people who live in the immediate community haven't felt entitled to access support. And so, I think the numbers that we've got at the moment are encouraging. The feedback that we're getting is encouraging. Questions around the future of the tower, as that starts to really materialise on the horizon, I think there'll be Grenfell, for those people who don't feel as affected perhaps at the moment, that it will come back into their horizon big time. And so I think we need to be ready, and we're preparing to be ready to make sure we can do what we can to support.
Can I ask one more quick question? Just in terms of, say, for example, Jim, the question that was just asked, I more mean the feedback you're getting. Would you mould the offer to sort of something different if there was a huge amount of feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And that's certainly part of the
plan.
I would anticipate that come the autumn, and indeed come the time of the next report to this committee, we will use some of the feedback we've had and indeed feedback from the independent scrutiny function to look at how we might evolve that offer. And that might be because we've established that we think there is a bit of a ceiling to the interest in the local area, and so we're able to do more with the budget that we have. But I think those are the kinds of decisions that we're already talking to the operations steering group about. It's where we might go depending on what the data tells us.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to reiterate just quickly, first and foremost, the very difficult job that the team have been doing, particularly in respect of the community part of this piece of work, given that you're trying to reach a lot of people, not very much money, and a figure that was plucked by lawyers that didn't really have anything to do with the community. Perhaps there's an argument there, and perhaps this will come out of the work as it carries on, that government and council together need to step up and make sure that the need is met, as we talked about meeting needs in the previous item. All the relevant parties who have a duty to do so should be doing so. And I wanted to just follow up quickly from Callum. I noticed you said something there about learning. That we don't just accept a consultation outcome and assume it's done and dusted. And Joe was talking about flexibility there. I wanted to particularly mention and ask about Grenfell Walk.
Mm-hmm. In relation to
what I've just said about learning, is it possible that there can be some learning there?
I think
Can you clarify for me? I'm missing the question.
So you might remember at a previous meeting there were concerns raised about the this is not the community aspect, this is the bereaved survivor aspect. How Grenfell Walk fits into that. And we have heard in the last paper again, we have bereaved survivors, we have the wider community, and we have Grenfell Walk. And I think also at leadership team they raised some concerns as well. And given that we're talking that there can be learning, and we don't just assume things are done and dusted, we want to be a fairer council. I wondered whether there was any scope for learning in that regard.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, there is always scope for learning and conversations, and we continue to engage with Grenfell Walk as a group and as individuals, and many of them continue to use the service. I think you highlight the dissatisfaction that was apparent and that we made clear in the papers in terms of some people within that cohort's sort of assessment of their fairness of the outcome of the bereavement survivor allocation. They were issues that were raised during the consultation, and there was evolution of the model during that process. And we've had conversations, and we continue to have conversations, and I'm open to that. The balance, as ever, when you're consulting, though, is that you have to try and balance that evolution with also recognising that in consulting, it is impossible, really, to be able to please every group to the fullest outcome. And I think if you aren't upfront about that, there is a risk that you will lead people down the garden path. So that doesn't mean that there isn't scope for further evolution, isn't scope for further conversation, but it also doesn't mean that we'll be able to satisfy every demand that comes.
Thank you.
Very.
And thank yeah, I just I do apologize if I've just glanced over and missed, but I just want to ask about children and young people's report about general subject, because when it comes to, I mean, just one thing I'm quite aware of is that there's been an increase in homeschooling. Now, I don't have numbers for that, so if I'm wrong, and it always strikes me that if you were 5 years old in 2017, right, and you lived in the area, and then like 3 years later you've got a lockdown, right? And these are all things that are going to pile on top of each other in terms of the child's development. And I'm not seeing anything. I mean, this isn't like what accusing you of it. I'm just saying that I don't see specifically sort of outreach. I mean, I know that just there are constituents who probably that I would have thought 10 years ago who see more homeschooling, and even if a parent does get the I forget the parental term, it does get the okay from from us, that it's from educational authorities that are providing adequate education. That still strikes me, essentially an outcome of Grenfell, right? Out of
That's a very interesting point. So is there a higher incidence of home education?
Not that I don't have the data. I wouldn't be able to say yes or no. We can absolutely take that away and come back to
I really challenge you all to know, actually.
Yeah.
So
within the Burden Survival Foundation, I know there's not, but within the broader cohort,
It's also see it all the time in the kitchen.
Yeah, it ties in with sorry, Chair, I'm not on the question, just to say take that away. That also ties in with school exclusions, obviously. I know that's obvious, but that's also just really one. Yeah, thank you.
Portia.
Thank you, Chair. I don't really have much to say on this paper. Thank you, Callum and Joe, for putting this together, and thank you for the work you've been doing. But something strikes me in here for point 5.68, and I'm very concerned because I've been doing a lot of support work with youths in the community. Some of which have been in gangs, some are just hanging out, and I just wanted to know, how is this service going to reach those who are affected by Grenfell? And how are they going to get the full benefit of this? Because it's no point we having this in a report saying yes, financial support for residents and employment. And really and truly, it's just on paper, or it's just meeting a few of these people need instead of all. We need to check it on the youth provision in the community. Those from 16, 17, 18, not getting in gangs, getting arrested for drugs and knives. These are the children that were living close proximity of Grenfell, and this is what I have to be dealing with on a daily basis. So I just want to ensure that this service gets to them. How are we going to ensure, and what agencies are we going to be working with to actually get them involved in something like this? Youth justice. Yeah. All these people, they need to know about these services, but there's no point you having, and it's not reaching no one. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. I think it's a powerful point, well made, both in terms of the educational implication, but also the read across to the sort of trauma and challenge that may well be having an effect and sort of materialising some of that behaviour that we see, not only just around Grenfell, but in the community in a broader point. The offer that we're trying to expand in terms of the educational support isn't an offer that has been in place before. It's an area that I think is really important. We've done work in schools, but we got more funding through the Grenfell Restorative Justice Funding Programme to be able to tackle that. And I would hope that alongside close work with youth justice and sort of the broader youth prevention system, we should be able to try and see that mitigated. But that's something we can try and update you on in a future meeting.
Thank you.
One of my, or Joe, is perceptions from the paper. So it appears to be a pivot away from the kind of academic aspect to the education support outlined in this paper, and more towards special needs. Is that, did I overinterpret, or is that what people want? It just seemed a pity to lose the kind of academic support. I know there are other needs as well.
No, I think that is. I can see where you come from on that, and I think the hub will be an answer to that. I agree. So there we will have inclusion officers, we will have primary and secondary specialists, we will have staff who are working in tandem and providing additional capacity for children both to be able to thrive in their school settings or indeed wherever they're learning, and have the ability to come and get that additional support. The educational bursary grants that we're providing to bereavement survivors and to a sort of more moderate perspective to the community, they have to be linked to learning outcomes. Now, so we're seeing people use them for university, we're seeing people use them for tutoring. It is broad in terms of its sort of application, but I think it's not quite
I was thinking of things like tutoring support, if you're uses of chemistry or whatever.
Indeed, but that's exactly
that
what
you
we're
are going to be able to, because I think that's something that we really ought to go through. That's great. I'm just going to say that you've asked for our views on the next report and what it should be like. And so I think my observation is shorter, and that for the sections 5, 7 and 8, really we'd want exception reporting, probably, if the committee's happy with that, just to try and sort of cut down on the bulk paper. I'm now going to ask Marwan and Emma.
Mary, can I ask one question? I think the key point I was trying to make is the case management system is not their responsibility to put together. Absolutely, is fundamental to enable them to do what they're going to do. This needs to be a message from this committee and officers in Callum and Joe's department to the other parts of the borough to enable that to happen.
Marwan, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a point of clarification on 3.11 on page 20. I'm a little bit concerned there with regard to the massive reduction in the opting out of key worker support. If you can just give me, Chair, the concept of the key worker support as a process, why this massive dropout? What lesson there? What do you read into this dropout of support?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I think when you look at the different breakdowns of the statistics, I don't think there's a huge drop off in my view. So in the first year, when we offered the opportunity to not have a key worker, we were at 49% of people choosing to opt in. Of the people who worked within dedicated service before, we've dropped down to 46%. The overarching statistic drops down to 43 when you include the new claimants, many of whom are abroad, many of whom aren't that interested in the access of a worker in England. But more broadly, I am very interested in working with bereavement survivors to think about both when they feel ready but no longer have access to that support. So I bear down on anyone who is opting out because they're dissatisfied with the provision. So when you choose to opt out of a worker, you have to tell us why. If people say it's because I've been getting really bad service, or because I don't want to engage with the council because I hate the council, which we get every now and then, we really look into it, we understand what more can we do, and we really inquire about it. When people are saying, you know what, actually, I feel I'm ready to try and not have you in my life, I want to be able to move on from that perspective, and know you're still there, and know I can opt back in the future, I think that is a positive thing.
Emma, did you have a question?
Not on this paper, Chair. I don't want the next one. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And I sat here very patiently and listened to you doing an excellent job of oversight and scrutiny. And but then again, like you are marking your own homework. It's like you are doing an assessment of your own officers doing the work, which is especially
independent scrutiny as well.
That's right. That's I'm going to get to that point. I'm not saying that you are not doing a good job, and I think you are, but maybe your focus is not the same as in the community. Because, for example, for us, what's important is nobody has asked anything about agenda item 5, which is the, or maybe it's not even part of this paper. Maybe I'm getting the wrong paper. Well,
So not possibly.
Agenda 5.
We're not on, we are on agenda 4.
Yes, yes, so, yes, the point I'm talking about is what is the update on the recommendations for the public inquiry? What's the council has done up to now?
So that's agenda item, the next agenda item.
Right, so that's
So
something,
we'll talk about that when we finish talking about this paper.
well, I think looking at the time and the chair, I do appreciate your leading a very good, but I think the answers sometimes are too long. And maybe that's
I couldn't agree with you more. And sometimes the questions are too long. You're talking to a conference.
I know, because I do chair meetings and I use the gauges sometimes. So just for the comfort of everybody else as well. So it's not, yeah.
So we've all received our marching orders. Thank you very much. Did you have a question on agenda item 4?
I have a question, yes. The question is about the, and I think what Councillor will ask, how can we work with the independent scrutiny that's supposed to be coming on board, that's not officially, and that's my question. This contract is worth 574,000, and it's been given without any proper due process. It's been given to one organization without any other organization bidding for the contract. How is that acceptable?
Thank you. Would like to comment in the terms of how we work together? I will take that away from this meeting and I will meet whoever is appointed. But Joe, do you want to reflect on that?
Thanks very much, and thanks, Nadine, for that question. I know you raised questions with government colleagues about the appointment of the ISF, and I wrote you to try and allay some of those concerns. So there was an open process. You're absolutely right that only one organisation came forward. Why
is that?
I was disappointed that was the case. I think there are a couple of possible explanations. One, I think we were asking for quite a unique set of skills and expertise as part of that contract. The specifications for that contract were set not by the council, but by the previous external scrutiny team. But they set the parameters for that role, what they expected it to do, and that was based on their engagement. I think also, sadly, I think some companies or organisations didn't want to take it on because of reputational risk, concerns about working with the council, concerns about working on Grenfell. So I was really disappointed that we didn't have more than one organisation to choose from. What we did then do is share that application with bereavement survivors, with people in the community, with ward councillors, and invite them to judge whether or not they felt that application was robust, whether it answered the specification, and whether they felt that the organisation would, two organisations involved and collaborate, would do a good job. And I think we were satisfied as officers, and certainly we had some good questions from bereavement survivors and others who said, you need to ask them about this, you need to ask them about that, and we were satisfied with the answers to those questions. So there was no reason not to appoint them, and I feel confident that they will do a good job, but I am disappointed, and I share your disappointment that there were not more organisations that bid, so we had a more competitive process.
Thank you. Melanie.
Thank you. So I'm actually going back, if it's okay, to the education hub. Okay, so trauma and SEN, going back to whether or not this is a sort of an SEN or education issue. So trauma and SEN, as we're aware, can overlap in how it can appear, largely due to levels of anxiety, which are evident in both. So what will happen to those unable to physically get into the hub, this educational hub, wherever it may be? And I would be wary of which school, if it ends up being put into a school, that would be, because we were told that that wasn't going to be what was going to happen. as you know, we did quite a lot of work with Lauren on this, and by the way, to then never hear about it again. This happens again and again. We give a lot of information in, and then we're not communicated with again. It's very it's quite worrying. And so what will happen to those children who can't get into the hub? One of the big issues we have at the moment is children who can't get into school. How are those families and those children being engaged with some sort of respect and dignity, not being threatened with court action, which is what quite often happens, which is absolutely not what the family needs, particularly obviously if they've gone through trauma and if they're bereaved or survivors, and this can and does happen. Can you get the professionals that are actually needed for this educational hub? Because there's a huge issue at the moment with the SEN professionals.
Or can that respond all right?
Yeah.
Those two.
Yeah, and then I have just a finish up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. So on the question of the location, so if it ends up in a school, it will be in a sort of unique part of the school, and it will not be integrated or controlled by any one school. But we are looking at other options as well, having heard some of that feedback. The concept of a hub can, I think, be a bit of a misnomer. So it will be a place where if you prefer to get educational support outside of a school setting, you can come. But the resources that we're actually recruiting to, which I'll touch on in a minute, will be available in schools. So we've done negotiations with all the schools based on numbers and need about how much of a speech language therapist, how much of an OT, etc., will be available in each of those school settings, with the school and parents being able to put forwards impact. So we're trying to mitigate that idea that we'll miss out on people. We've already started doing some of the work at where people are struggling to be in school settings in people's homes, and we can do more of that. And I'm really sorry that you've really engaged in the process and then have an update, and I'll make sure you get a fuller one.
I think I sent the last email on the 24th of April, I believe, asking for some information about that. And also about assessments as well. Children being assessed. We've got a huge issue with children in alternative provision schools that basically haven't been properly assessed within the system. And so if that could be considered. And I said I had just a quick follow-up, which is I can only talk about our organisations, and so we partner with 14 local organisations or groups every single week, apart from the other organisations that and charities, etc., that we work with. So it's a large network. We're not seeing any of you in our community. No one comes and visits us. Nobody. They come and visit us when they need information. That's it. We don't ask for, we don't get any support. Large parts of the community are being left out. What we're seeing are that you've got, and it may be RAs, it may be other organisations, but we're seeing the same people again and again on the same, all over the same committees, all at different boards, different committees, but you've got the same cohort of people, and it cuts out the rest of the community. This is a massive issue across North Kensington. We really, really appreciate if you could take this really seriously and look into it. It's also affected the Grandparent Project, and I've already brought this up with you, Callum. But I think that it's a very serious issue that you need to look at, because we're dealing with people who are huge, who have just never spoken to.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we move on to the next paper on this paper? No? Thank you very much. I have got the term one. The comment I made on the length of the paper actually is my comment on the next paper, but I think everything else stands. Thank you very much. And Sarah, I should have invited you forward. Let's move, and please do join us if you'd like to, for this next paper, which is paper A5. Hotly anticipated in my notice. Very good. Would you like to introduce this one, which is an update on the council's commitment in response to phase 2 of the inquiry?
That's right, thank you, Chair. And
Sorry, could I just point out I didn't really get an answer.
So that last question you asked us to make sure we took that seriously and did it.
Yeah, and the educational points.
Sure.
That's okay.
Thank you, Chair. And so this report, as you said, gives an update to the committee on the 45 commitments we made in response to our inquiry report. Those commitments were ambitious and they were developed at pace in about 2.5 months after the response to the inquiry was published, and we published our response adopted by full council at the end of that month. Again, we're committed to bringing 6 monthly updates to you. I think I'll leave it there, but I think there are areas of progress in the report and things that we have made significant progress, and there are areas where we need to do more work, partly to define more clearly how we measure and deliver the commitments. I think the priority for us has been to try and make sure these commitments are embedded in every area of council's work, rather than seeing them as a discrete programme of work. These aren't things that I think it is easy to tick off a list in any straightforward way. They are things that have to influence strategies right across the council. So I think there's a balance in bringing the report to the committee in showing that there is progress being made in each of these areas, but also in providing assurance that these are being taken forward and driven through the independent pieces of work that sit in departments and across the council and are scrutinised both by the Overview and Scrutiny Committee and by the individual select committees.
Thank you. Portia, shall I start with you? I'll start with the committee. No, I'm starting with the committee first. All right, Toby.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was not expecting.
No,
it's fine, okay, thank you. Yeah, so just give me one.
Would you like me to go to Claire first?
If you don't mind, because I was counting on the extra 5 minutes, sorry.
I wanted to ask about on page 78, where we have section 8, and we're talking about standards in public life. Obviously, this is hugely important in terms of rebuilding trust. And I wanted to ask, first of all, how are we embedding that within the culture change aspect, especially at the leadership level? When we talk about the leadership level here, I'm not seeing it include members. And that is actually a hugely important part of how you're going to drive culture change. It has to come from the very, very top across the board. So is that going to be included, do we think? That's page 88, C21 and C33. And I also just wanted to add, in terms of what Councillor Campbell has said previously in the work around this report, around rebuilding trust, that you need to have competence. And it was pointed out to her quite correctly that the flip side of competence is actually integrity. So there needs to be honesty and transparency, and that needs to be included within the culture change aspect. And I just wondered if that's going to be included. And finally, while we're talking about the scrutiny, I'm not seeing very much there about the consideration, which has been put forward multiple times, about Grenfell Recovery Scrutiny Committee. We talked about the independent scrutiny function, external scrutiny, and we have seen previously how important that is and the good outcomes that come from that. But we've also seen tonight, we've had a hugely long meeting, specifically about 3 really important Grenfell related issues. And obviously this is the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which has a broad remit, and it might be that had this come to a dedicated meeting, that we may indeed have had more public engagement. Sure, more public engagement.
Thanks, Councillor Simmons. And yeah, just to provide reassurance, I thought we'd included in the paper that the independent review of culture does include members. We were explicit about that in the commitment that we made. I think that's a good challenge about how we look at how to embed some of those early warning signs, as the Committee on Standards in Public Life, for Standards in Public Life calls them, in both the independent review of culture, perhaps asking people to look specifically, asking the organisation or the person appointed to look specifically about whether staff feel able to speak up and challenge the way things are done, which I know the committee emphasises in its report, but also looking at how we can build those into some of the other external reviews. We committed through an inquiry response to embracing independent challenge and oversight in a range of different ways, and hopefully you've seen in the resilience review and in some of the other examples of how we try to do that. But I think this report, which was published relatively recently, gives us some good tests that we can start to apply, and indeed perhaps that the committee can apply when looking at some of the examples of some of the activity going on across the council to make sure it meets those important tests. And the integrity and transparency point, I think that's again building the right considerations into that external review of culture, into the specification, and then testing those. I think will be critical. But you're absolutely right. I think we could do one of the things I'm hoping with this report and the feedback we get tonight is that we will be able to take a transparent approach to reporting which commands a degree of confidence. We've brought a very specific kind of report to the committee tonight, but alongside that we're looking at publishing a kind of update on progress which could be shared more widely, and we welcome views about how to make sure that's accessible for people and tells people what they want to hear.
Thank you.
Lucy.
I had a question on resilience and emergency planning, and just sorry, my brain cells are really going slow at this point. So the changes to our emergency response, how are we involving residents, particularly those who are high risk, in high risk housing, in shaping our planning and preparedness for that? Let's talk a bit more about that.
I think in terms of, I've not got all the detail. I'd be changing if I did. I think the work that we're doing in terms of resilience, in terms of engaging with residents, there's absolutely a dedicated post in terms of the community interface, in terms of the preparedness. We're doing more work than before in terms of thinking about data and vulnerable people, about making sure we know who they are, where they are, and engaging them in therefore what good looks like, and indeed individual services within building control, within resilience, within housing management would be well placed to follow up so we can get a more detailed answer to your question.
And there is some specific work that's obviously gone on in terms of raising awareness about the need for personal evacuation plans and how to make sure that everybody who should have one of those has one of those. And I think housing management would accept that that is very much work in progress, and that there is always a way of doing more to reach out to make sure that everybody who has those who has specific needs that might affect their ability to leave a building in the event of an emergency has that support. And I think that's not, I don't think they would say they're 100% there. I think they would say there's more work to do to reach out through new.
You hold all of that data on those individuals.
So on where people live in our housing, the challenge from the inquiry report was a broader one about list of vulnerable people which would support a response to an emergency. I think that, being frank, that is an area where we had hoped for more guidance from central government in their response to the inquiry report, partly because where people aren't our tenants, it's difficult to know how we would gather and store and maintain those kinds of records. So I think that's an area where we'll be pushing, as part of the work on resilience, for more national and regional guidance about how we might take that forward.
Thank you. Remind colleagues, not everybody has to ask.
I did have a question. Just a bit of feedback. When I was reading this report, it didn't make a lot of sense until I got to the table at the end with all 45 of them. And then I didn't work out why you've chosen those particular 20 to go into detail with. I appreciate that there will be detail, you may be subsequent pictures on that, but I realise that at the end. But in terms of questions, I am going to pass because I realise there's something more and
And just to say, Hassan, I think in a future report, if there are particular areas that the committee would like us to focus on in particular, that would be welcome, and then we can include a tracker with progress on all of them alongside that.
Thank you. Joanna.
Thank you. I'm sorry this paper's come so late because I also feel you're rushing through the answers of the previous paper and this paper. And I think it's a shame it wasn't on first. So for me, I very much read this report and I went, where are the councillors? So if you go to paragraph 559, 564, 636, phase 1, councillors, all councillors or general councillors are missing. And you kind of go, why? So when you talk about staff, you don't talk about councillors. So I would ask you to take that away and revisit it. Secondly, you talk somewhere about the charter. So page 59, you talk about the charter. It's translated into 6 concurrently plain English versions of the public. alongside the constitutional version, which will also be updated. I genuinely looked at that and thought, why can't it just be one version? Why do we need
We had a meeting about this earlier, and we've agreed that we will aim to have one.
Okay, lovely. And then my very last quick question, page 75, 652. You're only looking at the corporate complaints process. Whereas really, I thought a lot of the complaints were on housing, and we see this through the Housing Select Committee. So I'd actually question whether you should expand that.
Just on that final point, the corporate complaints process includes all the complaints that are made, including housing. I think the important thing was we wanted to make sure that the same standards applied to all complaints responses. So that very much includes housing in that remit.
You expressly say on there that there's children's and there's adults. You don't expressly say that there's housing.
Oh, well, yeah, they're all included there. Sorry, that's not sufficient.
Yeah, thank you. Well,
I agree with Joanna. It's unfortunate we switched the agenda around because I think it's done the NHS a lot of good to listen to these two papers and debate around them. I would like to follow up on Claire's point about change of culture, transformational change of culture. Do you think, my question is, can you confirm that you have the full support of the leader and the Chief Executive of the Council in the work you're doing on that?
Yes.
Thank you. And the specific question, page 67, was the thing about complaints review. And it comes back to this point about the case management system and the message that needs to go out to those providing the case management system, because you can't do a complaints review unless you have a case management system. And the specific, that's a generic one. The specific case on page 83, housing, this can seem to be one of the most enduring problems in this area. We need to get to a situation where we have full solution of housing complaints, rather than a tick box of a job that's been put out to be done. It's pipe that's been mended that still leaks. It's not a job done. It's a work in progress and doesn't need to be a new job. It must be the completion of one job. Sounds a detail, but Wales End Estate is full of those.
And I think there's a more general point there about deepening our understanding of the data. So on complaints, for example, it's tempted to focus just on how many are responded to in time. But I think the complaints reviews to do a more thorough qualitative review of what kinds of responses people are getting and whether or not they're demonstrating some of the things that we heard through the inquiry engagement about defensiveness or about not properly investigating or resolving some of the issues. And I totally agree that systems are an important part of this picture. And I think it's another reminder why these aren't a simple list of things to tick off, because a lot of the time they do involve the attitude of officers, the kinds of systems they're working with, the pressures on their time, the other demands, and so we need to be able to consider those things in the round in order to be able to give residents the kind of service they told us.
As Bank says, it's customer service rather than customer services.
Thank you. Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Just one quick question in the interest of time. On page 61, 5.35, the third bullet point down says people call it discrimination paid partner triggered reference. And it says before Grenfell and since. I had a bit of concern about since, because that would imply that the discrimination has continued after Grenfell. And on the page afterwards, paragraphs 5.37 and 5.38. First one is in the middle of the, it doesn't have line numbers, but in the middle of paragraph 537, this is key metrics referred to the committee and included in the council's annual performance report. I wanted to get a handle on what those were. If they could be sent to us afterwards, that'd be great. And then the final one was in 538. There are, once again, this is the second sentence. The audit report is due to be issued in mid-May, and then the details will be sent, I think, by autumn 2025. I wonder whether we can get those earlier if they're available now. And I just wanted to ask you a question on that. Discrimination since
Thank you.
Any discrimination seems slightly irregular. In fact, it's continuing, so it's slightly concerning.
And as I think we reported in I think the committee saw a sort of a near final version of the response to the inquiry. I think that was a very strong theme of the engagement we did in the month, 2.5 months after the inquiry report was published, and before we published our response, we heard very clearly that many people felt they were being discriminated against in terms of on the grounds of race, and that people felt that people in social housing were not treated equally in terms of not treated the same as other residents, and that they felt like second-class citizens. And that those, that was some of the feedback that prompted us to consider the independent review of culture and some of the other aspects that were added to the version of the report that you saw. So that was very much a challenge that we left with. It's also a challenge that has informed the development of the Fair Action Plan, which I know the committee has considered. That those metrics will come back to the committee, and the reason we've given October is because that's when we're bringing that's when we've agreed with the scrutiny team that we will bring a report on that. We're happy to make the audit available sooner to you so you can see it and see what it says. But I hope by October we will not only have the audit itself, we'll also have a plan of action in terms of how we respond to the recommendations. But that piece of work has looked very comprehensively at the approach to qualities across the council, and I think alongside some of this report will give us a strong mandate and a strong sense of how we need to move forward on some of those issues.
And it shapes the question of humility that I think we try to embody in this response, because although I think we've made progress, whether that be on the future growth plus support provision or indeed through the broader change, the work that we're trying to bring to the council, we have continuously heard, not just in the inquiry consultation, but for legacy consultations, day to day, our engagement in the community. You hear of experiences where people feel socially or racially discriminated against. And that challenge, that relationship with the council, although we're making progress, is set against a history and the challenge that is enormously different. And so it's horrible to see and to think that people still feel like that. But it is the reality, and our aspiration has to be to bear down on the numbers of people who feel like that by doing better, by delivering better, and by changing the culture more broadly.
And it's very important to listen to that and to respond to it. Pretty.
Just to expand further on Casco and Yankson, it's the overall thing, and in the tracker, we have all good intentions of our commitments, which is absolutely fabulous, but we constantly hear that it's not user friendly, inaccessibility, and I even have residents saying that all RBKC does is throwing money at it without actually delivering results. So, and this is more us as a fair landlord, caring landlord. How confident are you that we can deliver all of this, where residents actually feel, they all say they're being heard, they're being listened to, but it's the delivery. It's the delivery, the cost effectiveness, and the customer services is.
Are we talking about housing? Particularly
in the landlord, in the fair, particularly in housing, in your tracker, and the customer service. So that's very, that's very worrying.
Thanks, and I think that's a really powerful point. I think we could give you a kind of confident response on the commitments in terms of where we are and where we're going. But I completely agree that the broader challenge is how to ensure that it is making a difference to residents. I think one thing we haven't explored in this report, but could certainly do moving forward, is how we take these commitments and look at what we measure more broadly. So as part of the corporate performance reports that the committee considers regularly, what measures is it that the committee feels would tell us whether these commitments are really making a difference and having the kind of effect that we want to see. I think in some areas, like the work on the charter, there will be specific metrics set which will kind of give us some indication of that, and that's true in housing too. And there are some things that we need to measure, but we need to bring that work together and show what that kind of outcomes framework looks like. But you're right that this report is focused more on the delivery to date, and we need now to think about how we measure that kind of progress.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I ask Marla,
Sorry,
Toby, sorry, David, please come back to you.
Yes, we can go and get my shot. Thank you. So I'm going to have to phrase this very carefully because I just want to be very, very clear.
And simply.
Both of those things. And now the instruction is trying to store the chair. So this is
I think we need to let people have their
to
speak.
Okay. I'll get on with it. So and the reason I want to be clear is because this just naturally bumps right up against, where there's a bifurcation between executive and political. So there are implications, and I'm acknowledging that to everybody. I want everyone to understand that it is not political motivation. I do wonder if with reports like this, we're looking at focus plan, fair action plan, anyone. Make services more accessible, ensure no one is missing out on the services you need. Right. I think that there is in my experience, self-evident staffing issue, frontline services in this borough. I don't, and it is not for you to make the budgeting recommendations for the council, but, you know, is it something you even be empowered to do? I would hope, this is what I mean about that distinction. This is not something political. I think in terms of secure efficiency, delivering the services that we are bound to our people, right? To me, it's a no-brainer. We need more stuff. We actually just need more, and we're getting less. So my question is about that. And I also don't want to say, and I have to ask difficult questions. You understand that part of the difficulty is that it has implications for your job. And I mean that in as prosaic a way as I possibly can. So I hope that's clear. And is there anything you can comment on?
Yeah, absolutely. So within the brief that we're responsible for, it includes Grenfell delivery, it includes the corporate strategy and direction of the council, and in that it includes some of the savings and transformation work. So in other times I come to this committee and we talk about budgets and we talk about the position. And I think one of the benefits of Grenfell and Grenfell Legacy being aligned to some of those other areas of focus is because it allows us to try and ensure that where we're making investment and where we're making difficult financial decisions, we are doing what we can to protect the type of change, to protect the type of services residents need. Now, that is always going to be set against a difficult financial climate. So it would always be easier if we probably had a bit more money overall for the council, overall for public sectors, in the way that the NHS described earlier. But the reason why we commit the energy we do to this work, though, is to try and ensure that we build as many parallels as we can. And I think it's positive in a time of financial challenge that we are launching a funded fair action plan to try and drive challenge in that space. So I think it's a fair perspective. Challenge budgets will always be under stress. But I think one of the things we try to bring to bear for Grenfell Legacy is ensuring that we're protecting the services that we need.
And just to add to that, I think the independent review of culture is a mechanism which will help us get to the bottom of whether that is what's getting in the way of service delivery. I think sometimes it is a question about staffing or resourcing or kind of moving things around with systems, which then free staff up to do, if they're efficient, free staff up to do the job that really they're there to do to serve residents. But I think that's not always the case, and sometimes there are other things going on which need unlocking. And I guess it looks a bit different in different areas. And so I think that's what we need to probe further through that.
Okay, I appreciate it. And I will forego all of my 101 follow-ups I have to that and perspective. But I do want to just also ask quickly about A4, and I think this is actually laid out a bit more in the document itself. But when we talk about, taking discrimination, celebrity diversity, this means we will celebrate the diversity of our residents through education, cultural awareness, support our community to build positive relationships with each other. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know what it looks like, literally. Camera, what does it see? Right?
Yeah, I will send you, Councillor Benton, that's okay, the section of the Fair Action Plan that describes that, but also we will bring, when we come to the committee in October, we'll bring an update on kind of progress against that. That will give you a much stronger idea of what we have.
Good. Yeah, I like I say, I had a look, but I do like to have these things very explicitly. So that's my question.
Before I go to the floor, Portia, did you have a question?
I mean, if I answered all the questions I wanted to, anyway.
Marwan, am I asked? We're residents, when we come to the residents section.
Perfect. I will remember Marwan.
Sorry, I missed the.
It's all right. Now after you,
You
you go first.
Thank you, Chair. It's very kind. Thank you for this first report that we are expecting every 6 months, as highlighted in point 1.2 in your executive summary. I am a bit concerned if this is going to set a strategy of the development of this function in terms of future alignment. I'm just trying to seek some clarification, Chair, on the 45 commitments being highlighted in the executive summary 1.2 in the opening statement on page 51, 3.2. How these two are aligned regarding the recommendation, and that's for me, Madam Chair, it's a very worrying opening statement regarding the 58 recommendation being highlighted there, that we are not blaming the council and so on, and then yet it has a quite serious implication on the council future operation in terms of aligning, learning on the column, what you said regarding the legacy of this council and the lean operation regarding where we are in terms of budget. Before we look for more money, let's look for how we can save money in a very optimized way, reduce waste, because there are so much waste. And the Grenfell, because of 200,000 saving, it costs us hundreds of millions for the future. So I would just share, if we just make the alignment between that point from the executive 45 commitments to the 58.
I'm happy to address that. So the 58 recommendations are the recommendations made by the public inquiry.
That's correct.
To a range of organisations. They didn't make any recommendations directly to the council, but there was a lot of evidence in the report about serious failings by the council before, during, and after the fire. And so in response to the findings of the inquiry, and I know we brought a number of reports to this committee, we set out what we thought the implications of the report were for the council, and then on the back of that made our 45 commitments, which are about how we take forward and respond to some of the findings that the inquiry report made. So you're right, there isn't an absolute alignment because the recommendations were mostly for the government, and the government have responded and accepted most of the recommendations, but not all of them. So that's where the difference between those two figures comes.
Chair, can I seek just further, like if we can have a table to outline the commitments and the recommendation?
Could you
Summary?
forward something to?
Is it possible?
I mean, we must have I mean, it's a combination of the inquiry report, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ellen, sorry, you're supposed to do Ellen first and then.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Chair. This, of course, is for people out there. This is the report. This is what people are asking. This is what MPs are asking. They, often come to me and say, "How's it going?" or whatever. Councillors around the country who have got issues with their buildings, they all want to know what we are doing and how we're dealing with it. So this is, this is something that we're all discussing, and it's really good that we have a very, people are listening to all the councillors and so on. There's a lot of that tonight. But as far as a lot of people out there are concerned, this is it. This is the huge response to the atrocity which happened. So this is, getting this right is massive. There are a few things which I wanted to point out, and there'll be more over time, and as we get into more detail. But there are two things which may seem minor to you, but I did bring them up in the full council meeting in November when we were looking at a previous iteration of this report. And one of them was, and this is also something that outside people are listening to, the comments about building control. There's a huge amount of blame laid on building control and particular an officer, which is grossly unfair because the budget there was cut by half and there is no acknowledgement of that, and I think that's quite wrong. And the fact that the council is remediating that by increasing the budget by 4, I see, is a kind of sign. We should acknowledge somewhere that whatever the findings of the inquiry, which were quite correct, that actually the council should be accountable for cutting that budget in half. And the person who was responsible for that was broken and leaving the council full of fire. So that I think it's inaccurate. It comes across as inaccurate, that particular thing. And the other thing I know it's come up a couple of times already is how we work with council. It's worked beautifully tonight. I'm so happy to see people actually listening to work, especially the expert councillors. I slot up in North Kent because we are the experts. We deal with this every single day. And as a couple of people have said during the period that the councillors aren't in there, we are dealing with it. We're on the clear face. Many of us are dealing with it every day as soon as we step outside our door. We should be working together more. And I do find, and I mentioned this in November, that there are things happening in our ward in some list that we're kept out of. Now, is that just an omission? Is it just is it confidence? Is it a mission? Is it a cultural issue they don't think we should know, or is it actually a political issue that they don't want us to know what's going on because we have to wonder that sometimes? So that is the transparency
we aren't told what's going on in our ward or what the future of certain buildings and certain sites and so on. And that is very wrong. And if that's so, let's be polite, call it a cultural issue. But we are really the experts, as I say, dealing with it day to day. And I think there should be more acknowledgement of that. And we can work better if we do that. So those are my points. And yes, we could have had all of this in a committee, as Claire said, the Grant Recovery Scrutiny Committee. And it should be, this is something that some of us are asking the current government to have a look at that. So there is, there are 101 other points I could come on, but this is the public-facing report that we want to know about how we're dealing with it. So I think it's, it may not be a you may not notice it here, but that's how the perception's out there.
And I have two other contributors at least. The gentleman at the front raised his hand, and then I'll continue.
Councillor, can I just quickly respond?
Sorry, so just do it. I know you've got yeah, no, I haven't forgotten you. Exactly.
I just wanted to say, Councillor Enko, that this is the first report of its kind, and I totally appreciate the kind of attention that it will command both within the council and without. But I think the more feedback we can have from the committee about how to improve it, how to make the update on progress more accessible to residents, and as Councillor Hudd said, how to measure the impact that some of it's happening, the better. So I hope that this report will improve, and that we will get to the point where actually we have a different kind of update which speaks to some of the concerns that have been raised tonight.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry, I shouldn't go. Gentleman here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to quote from page 57, and it says that the inquiry found a consistent failure by the council and GMO to listen to residents and to take their concerns seriously. That is very strong statement. And one of the things that we have asked, and we spoke to the leader, also to others, about conducting an independent discrimination, procedural discrimination, or racial discrimination investigation. Same way that the fire brigade or other organizations have done. And that's what we would like to see, rather than saying, oh, we are doing cultural change.
You like to comment on that?
Yeah, so just to say that wasn't partly in response to some of the comments we've heard, the feedback we heard through the engagement on the inquiry report. We heard very clearly that people didn't feel it was sufficient for us to be holding ourselves to account or marking our own homework. And that's where the commitment to the independent review of culture came from. And that is exactly, the fire brigade was a good model, and we've had conversations with the fire brigade about that process. What's included in the committee report tonight is some suggestions about what that review might look like, and indeed a process for establishing the independent advisory panel who will help us set the terms of that review to make sure that it includes the things that were most important to residents. We did make an explicit commitment that that would include racial and social discrimination, but there were other cultural issues that people also want to see addressed. So hopefully that provides some assurance that that is something that's going to happen, and we've set out a timetable in the paper for appointing that person by the end of the year. But first we need to make sure, partly reflecting the comments of the committee tonight, that we get the specification for that piece of work right, so that they're looking in the right places.
Well, I think that Chair, if I may, you already have the community and they're telling you this is what we want. And I think you should go to them and ask them how they would like this job done, because that's the only assurance we give them by being part of the process. You already mentioned that in the review of the Charter for Public Participation and Citizen Panel, and I quote, "We will work with the residents to conduct full review of the Charter for Public Participation and the Citizens Panel, reflecting on sharing power in decision-making, seeking to move towards more participatory approaches and considering mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and oversight." Will you hold yourself to that, to what you just rated? Because you're saying we will experiment with more co-design and participatory approach to engagement and more robust engagement with the community.
Yeah, I think yes, and I think it's interesting you're quoting from there. I think section 6, first sort of 20 pages from section 6, set out how we'll try and apply that standard of work, both the appointment of the panel and then the process of the end-to-end culture review. So yes, I hope.
Gentleman here.
Yeah, it's really appropriate that I follow on actually, because I'm looking at the same section, which is 3.4, and the comment about the charter. On the face of it, the charter just looks like another piece of apparatus from the council. But actually, the council is very proud to say that they were the first organisation, council in the country to adopt such a charter. But right from the off, and I've said this before and I'll keep saying it, there is a flaw with this because there is no framework that sits below the charter. And what that means is everything that happens with the charter is done to the community, because the council determine when something is a letter through the letterbox or a piece of consultation or, heaven forbid, a piece of proper community-led work. So until that is resolved, it's fine words, and the charter is actually a misnomer. It's a charter for interaction by the council with the community, not for public participation. And I really hoped that the council would own that and start to see the power to the community. That's what it suggests. Yeah. I know there's a review. I've spoken to Olivia. I know that everybody is talking about, but that's still not on the table.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a point clearly made.
It's a point clearly made. It's a point well made. I think the charter in its inception took us from a standard of no engagement with residents to a minimum threshold of the 6 weeks, which we do meet. Do we always meet it on areas that people are interested in? I think that's a fair challenge. Do we consult on things that people are actually okay with us getting on with? But equally, do we not then create enough time to actually explore really detailed issues in partnership with people end to end? Like I'm overseeing that work with Olivia. I'm very keen that we get as close as we can to what you set out in that position, in terms of trying to ensure we push the boundaries of engagement properly, whilst also countering this point that we hear and was raised by the committee before about the reality that we do too much consultation and people feel fatigued, whilst also not being able to take control and ownership of what's happening. It's a fair challenge, and I hope the review will address it. And I appreciate the chance to talk to you once we've conducted the revised approach.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Chair.
I hadn't forgotten you.
Thank you. So I have been contacted by some residents during the meeting who are watching at home, and they have asked me to make the following contribution, which is that Nottingdale residents, and especially young people, speak for themselves, and they do not wish to be engaged. They do wish to be engaged with directly and not by proxy. And they are fed up. I'll just read it as that. We are fed up with people trying to use the growth and agenda for personal gain. It's becoming a real issue that impacts upon engagement. It reminds some residents of the early days when people attached themselves to the community. So the question from the residents is, how do you manage this to ensure that it is the immediate community that is engaged with on the matters that affect them, and that the process is not influenced by the aforementioned? And also, how do you check the claims made by groups who jump on the bandwagon, claims made about residents?
A trenchant challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. It's fundamentally a challenge. Our desire is to engage with everybody individually. That is our hope and aspiration. That's what we try to achieve through the Future Parental Support consultation by reaching out directly to children and young people. It is an issue that is prevalent not only with children, it's prevalent with adults. We need to make the right balance between engaging with groups, with people who are taking the time to become community leaders and to work positively for people, whilst also making sure we're engaging directly with individuals at their heart. Most of the ways that we try and undertake that is direct engagement. So whether that be direct emails, going to schools, doing door knocking, actually reaching people directly rather than depending on people. But I would love to meet with those individuals. I'm sure there's things they can teach us to continue to do better. It's definitely, we're not in a perfect position.
And just to say, we did some, I thought, for me, was very powerful engagement with children and young people around the publication of the inquiry response, and those conversations will stay with me and indeed kind of shaped some of the work that we then did to build that response. And I think we could do more. Often there's an assumption that children and young people aren't interested in this work. That's absolutely not the case. They are, and they are particularly interested in both what the council has done and holding the council to account for the commitments that it's made. So I think we can think about when we do the next round of engagement on this work, we can talk, I think, specifically about how we involve children and young people in that. And the only thing I think I'd say is that one other way of doing this is to set up panels and steering groups which aren't reliant on individual stakeholder groups or people volunteering or aiming to represent others, and actually we build kind of new constituents which are different and represent a wider range of views. And I think we'll continue to try and do that through these different programs.
Thank you. I think it's also about protecting residents and residents' voice from others from perhaps elsewhere that may wish to appear to be speaking for them when they may not
I think that's the point. Understood. I'm going to draw this conversation to a close, but I think there's some several. Well, there's one particularly strong, well, several strong things. One is the inclusion of councillors in these and elected representatives in all considerations. I think there have been some suggestions about what the next paper looks like. And I think there's also been a request to have some of the information that's germane to all of this issued to the committee as soon as possible, even if that's as front of meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for your discussions on that. I'm going to move on to paper A7, but I'm going to suggest that we do paper A7 by email. That we don't detain ourselves any longer. It's about 5:10, and that anybody who thinks that we have to take any of these items further, please email Jackie, who will deal with it and make sure it gets seen. And similarly, with the work programme, do you need to draw anyone's attention to anything there?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hey, Maxine.
Oh,
You're in
What do you mean?
Well, I need to formally bring the meeting to an end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.